Chapter 17 Naruto dodged yet another sword swipe from the Uchiha, backpedaling in circles around the dunes. Sasuke's face was one of pure, unadulterated hatred and anger as he tried repeatedly to hit the boy. But it seemed the Sharingan was having trouble predicting the movements. Every time he would see the phantasm of Naruto's body move, the image would slow or speed up, confusing his eyes. It was, to say the least, infuriating. The raven-haired boy thrust the sword forward, catching Naruto's cloak and tearing a gash all down the side of it, splitting it in twain. Naruto leapt back again and grasped the torn fabric. He frowned at first, the frown soon turning into a full-blown death glare. This was my father's jacket. It has priceless sentimental value to me, and you ruined it. Sasuke smirked and settled himself into a low sword stance. Your father? Don't make me laugh. A loser like you doesn't have family. You don't have parents. You don't have a legacy to live up to. I do. I have a family to avenge. I have a legacy to live up to. Remember that day when I said I would kill you on a whim? I'm killing you with purpose now. Naruto's face was set in a grimace as he jammed his staff into the ground and let the fabric fall from his hands before shucking the coat and tossing it aside. His shirt followed and Sasuke noticed the seals drawn onto his arms and his pectorals. What are those loser tattoos? Naruto smirked and stood up, rolling his pants legs up as well. The necklace around his neck bounced in the wind and he put it into his pants pocket, lest it get lost. You'll find out later if I actually need them, Sasuke. I didn't just appear into this world, you know. I was born like you were. I had parents who were more special than yours. Sasuke blinked and the blonde disappeared. Sasuke looked around frantically, only to have a familiar arm wrap around his neck and a kunai thrust against his Adam's apple. Naruto leant down to his ear and whispered. My parents were amazing, shinobi Sasuke. Amazing. There were none like them and there never will be. The Uchiha never made a Hokage, did they? They never accomplished anything. Itachi was the best of you all and he went rogue. You can't hold a candle to him, and do you know why? Sasuke grit his teeth and eased his sword back to strike the blonde. Naruto chuckled and pushed the kunai harder into the boy's Adam's apple. You will never beat him unless he lets you. You simply can never catch up to him because he will always be better than you in skill. Only an Uchiha can kill an Uchiha, you said one time. I think that's a bit facetious. I had plenty of opportunities to kill you at the Valley of the End and Haku did a good job of rendering you helpless. He could have taken you out at any time. Sasuke jerked his head backwards, headbutting Naruto in the nose and turned around quickly, jamming his kusanagi into the blonde's chest. Naruto coughed up blood and looked down. Sasuke grinned and twisted the blade, making the boy gasp and spit up more globules of blood. Worthless. Just like the rest of them. You were never on my level, Naruto. I only acknowledged you that one time because I had thought you a worthy rival. But you were never on my level. A low chuckle came from the blonde as he grasped the sword hilt and looked into Sasuke's eyes. You're right. I've never been on your level, because I surpassed you long ago. With a burst of smoke the clone was gone and Sasuke twirled round and round to find Naruto standing several feet away with his staff in his hand. The Uchiha activated his Sharingan again and sneered at Naruto. What's the matter, you blonde fool? Afraid to get close even when you have a knife to my throat? Naruto shook his head and tapped the staff on the ground. Sasuke, you're going to learn a hard lesson here. I'm going to show you just how useless that Sharingan of yours is. Sasuke let out a short barking laugh and the tomo in his eye twirled as if in disbelief. You couldn't break the Sharingan then without the Kyuubi's help and you sure as hell can't do it now. I seem to remember someone else needing help from another source as well. And you relied on its power first. I never chose to rely on another's power. Mine's been with me since birth. Want to know something else? The Uchiha eyed him warily as Naruto grinned. I haven't used it since either. Now pay close attention. I'd been training for the day we would meet again and I have a nice little surprise for you. Remember those tattoos you were admiring? Those are seals. I have 6 on my body. Let's see you keep up when I release them. I wonder how many I'll have to release to take you down. Sasuke grit his teeth as the blonde mused to himself. His eyes widened when he felt a sudden rush of wind as Naruto swiped a hand over one of the seals on his chest and it slowly vanished. The blonde smiled and patted his right pec. Ah, that's better. Now then, let's see how much faster I am. In a blur, he was before Sasuke and clubbed him in the chin with the staff, sending the Uchiha rocketing backwards over the sand. Sasuke skidded for a moment and rolled on his back, coming back to his feet. Naruto grinned and tapped the sand with his staff. Well? What'ya think, you whiny bastard? Sasuke's answer was to snarl and rush back towards him, Sharingan blazing. Kisame looked across to Itachi and saw he too had his eyes fixed solely on the fight below. The giant blue man wiped his brow again, hoping desperately for a thunderstorm or even a simple cloud to cover the sun. The kid's gotten better, huh? Your brother is having quite the time down there. Itachi nodded and let his eyes rest for a moment. Those seals on him intrigue me. I've never seen such things. I wonder if he made them himself. I dunno. That breeze felt good though. I'm almost tempted to shake his hand and thank him for that. Itachi grunted and reactivated his Sharingan. I am still not impressed by either, yet though Sakura cracked her knuckles as she looked at Karen, who looked like a mouse caught by a cat. The red-haired girl's eyes darted here and there looking for a way out. Hey! Red! Give up and I won't knock the mess out of you. Karen's eyes locked onto Sakura and she dipped into a taijutsu stance. I don't want to be here right now, and I know this is a bad idea, but Sasuke-sama wants those eyes like his brother. Uzumaki has to die. I have to help Sasuke-sama attain his goal. Sakura looked perplexed as the girl readied herself. Why? Why help him? Karen looked into Sakura's eyes and hardened her own. He saved me from Orochimaru. That's all you need to know. Sakura threw up her arms and blocked the first kick before rolling aside. She grimaced when she thought of how she had used to blindly follow Sasuke everywhere and apparently he had actually saved this girl. It would be hard to convince the redhead to give in. Sakura pulled her gloves a little tighter and leapt back into the fray. Kakashi eyed Suigetsu with utter boredom, his hands in his pockets. You know, I have history with that sword. It doesn't belong with you. It was a monument to a great swordsman, one who earned my respect. Suigetsu brandished the sword with both hands and sneered. I'm honoring Zabuza in my own way. Kubikiri Hocho was meant to be used, not to rust in the ground. Claiming the blood of the copy ninja will be a great feather in my cap and another ninja fallen in the sword's illustrious history. Kakashi sighed and blinked again, his eye only half open. I was hoping you would give up so I could go and watch my two former students beat the tar out of each other. But, I guess taking that sword back to its rightful place is just as good. Suigetsu scoffed and lowered the sword another inch. The only way you're getting this sword from me is to pry it from my cold, dead hands. Kakashi's visible eye glared at the former mist mean and he pulled a kunai out of his pouch. So be it. Don't say I tried diplomacy. Suigetsu ran to him with a battle cry and Kakashi blocked the sword with his kunai, his lazy eye still present. You know, you may have skill for one so young, but Zabuza was a master and I defeated him. You don't have a snowball's chance in hell. Suigetsu laughed and lunged the sword back again, swinging for Kakashi's midsection only to hit a Kage Bunshin. Resorting to cheap tricks, copy ninja? That's fine, so can I? Kakashi shook his head from his position under the ground. You're a water user in the desert, you fool. You're way out of your element. Kakashi wordlessly reached up and grasped Suigetsu's ankles, pulling the boy underground so only his head was visible. He crouched down beside the youth and gave him a nice smile. Like I said, you have skill, but Zabuza was a master. You're out of your league. His smile faltered when Suigetsu gave him one of his own. You ain't seen nothing yet, copycat. The others were all gathered around Jugo as his demeanor became more and more bestial and barbaric. It almost seemed as if he was having a battle with him. Chapter 17 Naruto dodged yet another sword swipe from the Uchiha, backpedaling in circles around the dunes. Sasuke's face was one of pure, unadulterated hatred and anger as he tried repeatedly to hit the boy. But it seemed the Sharingan was having trouble predicting the movements. Every time he would see the phantasm of Naruto's body move, the image would slow or speed up, confusing his eyes. It was, to say the least, infuriating. The raven-haired boy thrust the sword forward, catching Naruto's cloak and tearing a gash all down the side of it, splitting it in twain. Naruto leapt back again and grasped the torn fabric. He frowned at first, the frown soon turning into a full-blown death glare. "This was my father's jacket. It has priceless sentimental value to me, and you ruined it." Sasuke smirked and settled himself into a low sword stance. "Your father? Don't make me laugh. A loser like you doesn't have family. You don't have parents. You don't have a legacy to live up to. I do. I have a family to avenge. I have a legacy to live up to. Remember that day when I said I would kill you on a whim? I'm killing you with purpose now." Naruto's face was set in a grimace as he jammed his staff into the ground and let the fabric fall from his hands before shucking the coat and tossing it aside. His shirt followed and Sasuke noticed the seals drawn onto his arms and his pectorals. "What are those loser tattoos?" Naruto smirked and stood up, rolling his pants legs up as well. The necklace around his neck bounced in the wind and he put it into his pants pocket, lest it get lost. "You'll find out later if I actually need them, Sasuke. I didn't just appear into this world, you know. I was born like you were. I had parents who were more special than yours." Sasuke blinked and the blonde disappeared. Sasuke looked around frantically, only to have a familiar arm wrap around his neck and a kunai thrust against his Adam's apple. Naruto leant down to his ear and whispered. "My parents were amazing shinobi, Sasuke. Amazing. There were none like them and there never will be. The Uchiha never made a Hokage, did they? They never accomplished anything. Itachi was the best of you all and he went rogue. You can't hold a candle to him, and do you know why?" Sasuke grit his teeth and eased his sword back to strike the blonde. Naruto chuckled and pushed the kunai harder into the boy's Adam's apple. "You will never beat him unless he lets you. You simply can never catch up to him because he will always be better than you in skill. Only an Uchiha can kill an Uchiha, you said one time. I think that's a bit facetious. I had plenty of opportunities to kill you at the Valley of the End and Haku did a good job of rendering you helpless. He could have taken you out at any time." Sasuke jerked his head backwards, headbutting Naruto in the nose and turned around quickly, jamming his kusanagi into the blonde's chest. Naruto coughed up blood and looked down. Sasuke grinned and twisted the blade, making the boy gasp and spit up more globules of blood. "Worthless. Just like the rest of them. You were never on my level, Naruto. I only acknowledged you that one time because I had thought you a worthy rival. But you were never on my level." A low chuckle came from the blonde as he grasped the sword hilt and looked into Sasuke's eyes. "You're right. I've never been on your level, because I surpassed you long ago." With a burst of smoke the clone was gone and Sasuke twirled round and round to find Naruto standing several feet away with his staff in his hand. The Uchiha activated his Sharingan again and sneered at Naruto. "What's the matter, you blonde fool? Afraid to get close even when you have a knife to my throat?" Naruto shook his head and tapped the staff on the ground. "Sasuke, you're going to learn a hard lesson here. I'm going to show you just how useless that Sharingan of yours is." Sasuke let out a short barking laugh and the tomo in his eye twirled as if in disbelief. "You couldn't break the Sharingan then without the Kyuubi's help and you sure as hell can't do it now. I seem to remember someone else needing help from another source as well. And you relied on its power first. I never chose to rely on another's power. Mine's been with me since birth. Want to know something else?" The Uchiha eyed him warily as Naruto grinned. "I haven't used it since either. Now pay close attention. I've been training for the day we would meet again and I have a nice little surprise for you. Remember those tattoos you were admiring? Those are seals. I have 6 on my body. Let's see you keep up when I release them." I wonder how many I'll have to release to take you down. Sasuke grit his teeth as the blonde mused to himself. His eyes widened when he felt a sudden rush of wind as Naruto swiped a hand over one of the seals on his chest and it slowly vanished. The blonde smiled and patted his right pec. Ah, that's better. Now then, let's see how much faster I am. In a blur, he was before Sasuke and clubbed him in the chin with the staff, sending the Uchiha rocketing backwards over the sand. Sasuke skidded for a moment and rolled on his back, coming back to his feet. Naruto grinned and tapped the sand with his staff. Well? What'ya think, you whiny bastard? Sasuke's answer was to snarl and rush back towards him, Sharingan blazing. Kisame looked across to Itachi and saw he too had his eyes fixed solely on the fight below. The giant blue man wiped his brow again, hoping desperately for a thunderstorm or even a simple cloud to cover the sun. The kid's gotten better, huh? Your brother is having quite the time down there. Itachi nodded and let his eyes rest for a moment. Those seals on him intrigue me. I've never seen such things. I wonder if he made them himself. I dunno. That breeze felt good though. I'm almost tempted to shake his hand and thank him for that. Itachi grunted and reactivated his Sharingan. I am still not impressed by either, yet though Sakura cracked her knuckles as she looked at Karen, who looked like a mouse caught by a cat. The red-haired girl's eyes darted here and there looking for a way out. Hey! Red! Give up and I won't knock the mess out of you. Karen's eyes locked onto Sakura and she dipped into a taijutsu stance. I don't want to be here right now, and I know this is a bad idea, but Sasuke-sama wants those eyes like his brother. Uzumaki has to die. I have to help Sasuke-sama attain his goal. Sakura looked perplexed as the girl readied herself. Why? Why help him? Karen looked into Sakura's eyes and hardened her own. He saved me from Orochimaru. That's all you need to know. Sakura threw up her arms and blocked the first kick before rolling aside. She grimaced when she thought of how she had used to blindly follow Sasuke everywhere and apparently he had actually saved this girl. It would be hard to convince the redhead to give in. Sakura pulled her gloves a little tighter and leapt back into the fray. Kakashi eyed Suigetsu with utter boredom, his hands in his pockets. You know, I have history with that sword. It doesn't belong with you. It was a monument to a great swordsman, one who earned my respect. Suigetsu brandished the sword with both hands and sneered. I'm honoring Zabuza in my own way. Kubikiri Hocho was meant to be used, not to rust in the ground. Claiming the blood of the copy ninja will be a great feather in my cap and another ninja fallen in the sword's illustrious history. Kakashi sighed and blinked again, his eye only half open. I was hoping you would give up so I could go and watch my two former students beat the tar out of each other. But, I guess taking that sword back to its rightful place is just as good. Suigetsu scoffed and lowered the sword another inch. The only way you're getting this sword from me is to pry it from my cold, dead hands. Kakashi's visible eye glared at the former mist mean and he pulled a kunai out of his pouch. So be it. Don't say I tried diplomacy. Suigetsu ran to him with a battle cry and Kakashi blocked the sword with his kunai, his lazy eye still present. You know, you may have skill for one so young, but Zabuza was a master and I defeated him. You don't have a snowball's chance in hell. Suigetsu laughed and lunged the sword back again, swinging for Kakashi's midsection only to hit a Kage Bunshin. Resorting to cheap tricks, copy ninja? That's fine, so can I? Kakashi shook his head from his position under the ground. You're a water user in the desert, you fool. You're way out of your element. Kakashi wordlessly reached up and grasped Suigetsu's ankles, pulling the boy underground so only his head was visible. He crouched down beside the youth and gave him a nice smile. Like I said, you have skill, but Zabuza was a master. You're out of your league. His smile faltered when Suigetsu gave him one of his own. You ain't seen nothing yet, copycat. The others were all gathered around Jugo as his demeanor became more and more bestial and barbaric. It almost seemed as if he was having a battle with himself, like a part of his psyche, the dark part, wanted dominance at the moment. The giant grunted and groaned, grasping his head. Shikamaru watched as Jugo fought with himself. He couldn't figure out really what the problem was, but he was leaning toward split personalities. He sidled up to Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Gaara. So any ideas on what this guy's capable of? If I have some clues, maybe I can come up with a way to subdue him. Jiraiya nodded, his eyes still transfixed on the struggling Jugo. His name is Jugo. My sources tell me that he is the origin of the cursed seal. His psyche is split into two parts, a peaceful one and a bloodthirsty one. His bloodthirst is always fighting to get out and kill. He usually keeps it in line, but in situations like this, it comes to the forefront. Shikamaru nodded his head. If I capture him in my Kage main and Gaara and Chuji help subdue him, can one of you knock him out? It should be possible. From what I hear, he has no tact when he's in a rage. He's just a killing machine. We'll help you bind him and then Tsunade can knock him out with her strength. Shikamaru nodded and made the rat seal. Here we go then. Naruto grinned as he dodged another blow from Sasuke. He was somewhat disappointed that the Uchiha speed wasn't up to par with his, but remembered a time when it was the other way around. Naruto had always been the powerhouse of the group while Sasuke had been the speed demon. All of his attacks depended on the speed to deliver them. Sasuke grit his teeth and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He had spent the last couple of minutes just trying to land a blow on the blonde and nothing had worked. Surely those 6 small seals hadn't done that much to help his speed. And what the hell were they? He took a deep, calming breath and stood up straight again. I'm done playing around with you. It's obvious that you've improved. But so have I. You have to remember, I killed Orochimaru. Naruto scoffed. Oh please, anyone could have beaten Orochimaru if they'd attacked him at his weakest, on the day his current body was giving out. Now quit complaining and just do the cursed seal thingy you like to do. I have other places to be. Sasuke growled as the black mark spread across his skin. He hated to be disregarded as insignificant and what Naruto was doing was infuriating him right now. He grinned as the black flames danced across his face and his eyes changed once again. You're going to regret that. Kisame watched gleefully as the two boys pounded away on each other, his fingers drumming excitedly on Samehada's hilt. Hey Itachi, how far do you think those two will go? Itachi didn't bother looking at his much larger companion as he kept his Sharingan active, watching the two. I don't think it will last much longer. Ninja fights of this caliber rarely do since they'll be pumping out such massive amounts of chakra. Kisame nodded and patted the sword back and forth in his hands. Will we make a move on the Jinchuriki? I've already told you, no. There is something else going on here. Sakura sighed as she dragged an unconscious Karen back toward the main group. The girl had been admittedly little trouble, having virtually no formal training as a ninja. Her chakra sensing capacity and temper had been on par with Sakura's though, and the fight had escalated into an all-out bitch fest. Sakura felt around unhappily at a small, missing patch of her hair that had been torn out. She turned around and glared at the unconscious girl and tugged a little harder on the hair she had her by. If she had time to stop, her attention diverted to the scene of Kakashi and Suigetsu fighting. Kakashi wasn't really having much trouble. True, Suigetsu may have been the coming of the next Zabuza, but unfortunately for him, he never saw his true potential realized. His training had not been completed and in all reality he just swung the sword wildly. Whereas Zabuza knew how to utilize the massive blade, Suigetsu didn't and it showed. It showed badly. Kakashi blocked another strike and slashed out at Suigetsu's head, the kunai going right through with a splash. He frowned unhappily and leapt back, catching sight of Sakura as she watched the fight unfold. He slashed the boy again and watched as the water splashed and then reformed. Suddenly, an idea came to him. Sakura! Go get Gaara and Jiraiya-sama and tell them to come here. Why? I need a beaker. She puzzled at his words, but nodded and ran off. Kakashi turned back to Suigetsu who was staring at him with amused eyes. You've lost it, haven't you? You should have had her help you, because by the time she gets back, you'll be dead. Kakashi gave the boy another eye smile and jumped back, making hand signs as he went. Actually, I'm just running distraction right now to keep you away from your teammates. In the desert, you're not much help at all. Futon, de Tapa. The wind whipped at Suigetsu, and he jammed Kubikiri into the sand to hold his place. Once the wind had died, he yanked it free and charged Kakashi once again. Sakura came running up to the group, and her eyes widened at the sight of a transformed Jugo, struggling against the bonds that Shikamaru, Gaara, and Chuji had him trapped in. He was screaming bloody murder that he would kill them all, and Shikamaru was sweating from exertion. Now Tsunade-sama. Now. Tsunade leapt onto Choji's giant hand and reared her fist back. Say goodnight. She slammed her fist into Jugo's face, making it jerk sideways. She stared in disbelief as he slowly turned back to her and grinned. I'm gonna kill you slowly, bitch. Real slow. She reared back again and kept slugging him over and over. Lee, seeing her begin to tire, leapt in and took over. No matter how much they hit him though, they couldn't knock him out. Miji suddenly thought of an idea and walked over to Gaara. Hinata-sama, and I will take over. We just need you to provide us an opening. Gaara kept concentrating and nodded. What do you need? Miji called Hinata over and stood before Gaara. We need you to make openings for us at these spots. Just call your sand away from him at these points and have Chuji relinquish his hold while Shikamaru retains his. Ino. Give Shikamaru a soldier pill. The blonde rushed to Shikamaru's side and popped a pill in his mouth. The results were instantaneous as Shikamaru's shadow widened slightly and he concentrated harder. Miji and Hinata began to tap Gaara on his body, and he let the sand slide away from Jugo's body in those certain spots. The two Hyugas walked to either side of Jugo, one in front, one in back, and readied themselves. They spoke as one. You are in the field of our divination. Gaara concentrated more and tightened his grip. Let go now, Akimichi. Chuji jerked his hand back just in time as Hinata and Miji rushed forward and began to pound into Jugo's body at his points, the sand just enough out of the way for them to blast their chakra into his coils. The transformed Jugo slowly began to nod his head until he passed out, and Shikamaru and Gaara dropped their jutsus. Gaara turned to some Sunajounins and snapped his fingers. Bind him in the strongest chakra sapping chains we have and throw a few more on, for good measure. Bind her in chakra sapping rope. Make sure both are blindfolded and gagged. I don't want to have to put up with either one's mouth. The shinobi saluted and shushined off. Sakura tapped Gaara on the shoulder and he turned with a quirked eyebrow. Yes, Haruno? What is it? Kakashi-sensei said he needs your help. He said he needs a beaker. Gaara blinked and nodded before rushing off towards where Kakashi was fighting. Sakura ran to Jiraiya and grabbed his shoulder. Can you still do fire jutsus? The old toad sage nodded his head. Come with me. Kakashi-sensei said he needed a beaker. Jiraiya's curiosity piqued. He followed her to where Kakashi was fighting. When they arrived, they found Gaara stoically watching the copy ninja keep Suigetsu occupied as the frustrated young man desperately tried to hit Kakashi with his sword. Kakashi saw the two he needed standing to the side and hollered. I need a beaker. The two men stood puzzled at his words until Sakura snapped her fingers. Of course. Suigetsu can change into water and get away, so he needs a container to put him in. Gaara-sama, make a large container with your sand, and Jiraiya-sama, you bake it with a keton jutsu. It'll turn it into glass. The two nodded and Gaara formed the needed canister and Jiraiya baked it until it turned clear. They smiled at their handiwork and Sakura grabbed it in her hands, running toward the two combatants. Kakashi saw Sakura coming and stopped Kubikiri with his kunai, smiling at Suigetsu. It seems our fun has come to an end. I still say you were no Zabuza though. What the hell are you talking about? As he finished speaking, Suigetsu realized too late the shadow plunging toward him on the ground and found himself trapped in a glass container, his sword on the outside. He slammed against the glass, but found it wouldn't budge. It was too thick. Quick! Bake a plug before he escapes. Jiraiya and Gaara had already thought of that however, and the glass lid slammed shut over the hole while Suigetsu cursed them from inside. Kakashi wiped his brow and gave them a nice smile. Been a while since I've worked out in such hot weather. Now, let's find Naruto. A resounding boom and spray of sand came from nearly a mile away, and Jiraiya sighed. Shouldn't be too hard to find him. I'll get a toad to take this one back, and we'll tell the others to meet us there. The three nodded and took off while Jiraiya summoned a toad. As soon as it was off in the direction of the rest of the ninjas, he took off toward where Naruto undoubtedly was. Naruto spat out a glob of spit as Sasuke's fist sank into his gut. He had thought one seal would be enough, even for the cursed seal, but he was mistaken. The damn thing just kept enhancing Sasuke's strength and speed. The only downside was that it kept draining him quickly of chakra since there was no longer an Orochimaru to draw from. He rolled out of the way of a Chidori enhanced sword swipe and backflipped away a couple times to a safer vantage point. I guess one seal isn't enough, Sasuke. I'll have to take another couple off. Sasuke sneered and charged his sword again. What's the matter, loser? Afraid of me already? No. Just better to be safe than sorry. Naruto swiped his hand over the other seal on his chest and the one on his right arm, and the wind kicked up again as the resistance left his body. He glared at Sasuke and held his arms out to the side, parallel with the ground. I haven't just been learning jutsu, Sasuke. I've been learning manipulation. Let me show you an invention of mine. Of course, no hand seals, so you can't copy it. He nearly laughed at Sasuke's face and knit his eyebrows together with concentration. I can only do this when I drop 3 seals, because there's usually too much resistance. Check it out. His eyes grew harsh as the wind began to pick up to incredible speeds and the sand whipped around him, leaving cuts in his pants and on his arms. Naruto paid no heed as Sasuke brought his arms up to shield his face. Kamikaze. The wind that had surrounded Naruto focused into a non-existent wall and barreled towards Sasuke, kicking up the sand as it went. Naruto watched silently as it slammed into the raven-haired boy. Kisame's jaw dropped as he watched Itachi's brother get slammed by the huge wall of wind. Holy shit. Chapter 18. I say kill him now and be done with it. The longer you let him live, the more he will struggle to destroy you all. Tsunade sighed and cast weary eyes upon Gaara. The Kazekage had tried to impress upon her the importance of ridding the world of the youngest Uchiha ever since they had captured him. She knew it would be the best thing to do, but unlike the Kazekage, she had to think of what the Konoha Council would want. Gaara, you know as well as I do that I can't just kill him. The Sharingan is a valuable weapon to the village hidden in the leaves. And it's a weapon that hasn't been there for years if you don't count Kakashi. His crimes are many and his virtues few. Just kill him. I'll do it for you. Sabaku-kyu. Sabaku-soso. He won't feel a thing. He'll be dead, I'll be happy. Naruto will have to worry about one less person wanting to kill him, and everybody wins. Gaara, the Kazekage, put on a fierce face and his sand rose behind him. He was tired of arguing his point and not actually being heard. Jiraiya moved to stand beside Tsunade in case Gaara tried anything. The former Jinchuriki took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Tsunade, let us not talk as Kages and village leaders for the moment. Let us talk as normal human beings. Does the Uchiha deserve to die for his crimes? Tsunade bowed her head and closed her eyes. Yes. Does he deserve pity? Does he deserve to even make it back to Konoha alive? No. Gaara put on an exasperated face and glared at Tsunade. Then why in the 7 hells are you taking him back alive? Kill him now. I can't. I can't just kill him. He has to stand trial. The redhead sat back in his chair and sighed while shaking his head. This is the difference between Konoha and the rest of the world. Criminals are enemies of the state and should be treated as such. When they break the law, they no longer have rights. When a murderer murders, he should be killed before he can kill again. When a traitor betrays, he shouldn't be let back in the country to stand trial so he can live another day to betray again. I stand firm in the belief that he should be killed. Gaara stood and walked over to Tsunade. She tensed with every step he took and cringed when he put his hand on her shoulder. She looked up into his eyes and found his usually stoic face somewhat troubled. I am sorry I ever put him into your custody, Hokage Dano. I should have executed him while he was still in the custody of my ninjas. At least then, it would have been on my hands instead of yours. Gaara, he stopped her by raising his hand. What is done now, I suppose. I'm retiring for the night, Tsunade. I shall see you off tomorrow morning. She nodded and watched as he left. She turned to Jiraiya as he helped her up and put an arm around her shoulder. She was grateful to him at times like these. He's right, you know. We should have killed him on the spot. Letting him live like this is a huge mistake. Jiraiya nodded and squeezed her a bit harder. I know. But unlike Suna, we do things differently in Konoha. Clans have a lot more say-so and power. And sadly enough, the Uchiha clan has always been an important facet of Konoha. Even if they are traitors. Tsunade nodded and allowed Jiraiya to lead her away. They were almost back to their hotel room when she stopped him. Let's go to the dungeons. I want to say something to him. Jiraiya was not fond of the idea, but tagged along anyway. He couldn't very well let her go alone. Uchiha Sasuke was feeling very indignant at the moment. Shackled and chained like a common criminal, a blindfold placed over his precious eyes and warded with seals put on by the great toad Sannin Jiraiya himself, he was feeling very put out. He hated to feel powerless, and yet, here he sat, totally under the control and at the mercy of his captors. His teammates, if you could so call them that, were in other sectors of the dungeon. He chuckled mirthlessly. It seemed that Gaara was not so big a fool as to put them all together. He heard the sound of the guards shuffling and the bolts on the door being moved. Was he being moved already? How long had he been in here? Sitting in the darkness, one couldn't tell time. The shuffle of the feet got closer until he heard the crunch of the pebbles underfoot. He looked up, not that it mattered, and sneered at whoever was before him. I know you're there. Why don't you reveal yourself? Afraid I might get you? A snort was his answer, and the sneer left his face, to be replaced by a frown. Boy, I've met bigger boogeymen than you in street gangs. Afraid? You're the one who should be afraid. Humph, Jiraiya. What does a one-armed old has-been such as yourself want with me? I want nothing from you except for you to shut your mouth and pay attention. Sasuke had not been reprimanded many times in his life. Even Orochimaru did not keep him on too tight a leash. His surprise quickly turned to anger. Who the hell do you think you are? Jiraiya shut the boy's mouth by backhanding him to the ground and then lifting him by his collar. Shut your mouth. I know who I am and I know who you are. You're in a precarious position now, Uchiha, and if I were you, I'd do everything I could to prolong my life. With all those suppressing seals I have on you, all it would take is a twist of the neck and you'd be dead. Hell, after all the suffering you've caused my student, I'm half tempted, Jiraiya, that's enough. The toad Sannin scoffed and stood upright, letting go of Sasuke's shirt in the process. The boy coughed a bit and pulled himself back into a sitting position. So, even the great and powerful Hokage sees fit to visit me. I'm honored. Tsunade scowled and bent over at the waist, her hands on her hips. Don't patronize me, you little punk. I came here to tell you that I will do everything in my power to make sure you get the death penalty. It was pure luck that you survived that backlash from your attack. It should have fried your ass. You're lucky Sakura was able to patch you up as well as she did, although you'll have some scarring for life. Naruto came out without a scratch, by the way. I don't care what that loser walked away with. I'll kill him all the same. Tsunade clucked her tongue and stood upright again. See? That's why no one likes you, kid. You make threats all the time and then wonder why you have no allies. You've just threatened to kill an ally of Konoha, in front of the Hokage, no less. What kind of deal can you expect to strike to save your life? The smile on the raven-haired boy's face was sickening. I expect the council to give me a hero's welcome while Naruto gets exactly what he always has. Nothing. He'll be shunned while the people clamor for me to come back. Tsunade sighed and shook her head as she motioned for Jiraiya to follow her. when she reached the door, she turned back and gave him some parting words. You'll soon find that things in Konoha have changed, Sasuke. A few years can make all the difference in the public's perception on certain people. Those words would bother him for quite some time. Temari groaned as the sun came in through the window and settled on her face. She was enjoying the warmth that Naruto gave off, especially since nights in the desert were so chilly. She nuzzled further into his neck and squinted her eyes, trying to block out the rays. It did no good since the sun refused to relinquish its gaze upon her. With a sigh, she sat up and reached across to the nightstand for her hairbands and quickly tied her hair into its usual four-ponytailed state. She leaned back against the headboard and pulled the covers up over her knees as she watched Naruto sleep. It was relaxing listening to him snore softly, and it never ceased to amaze her how peaceful he looked in the early morning. She realized after a few minutes that today was the day they had to leave for Konoha, and she gently shook his shoulder. Naruto, wake up. We have to get ready to leave soon. He rolled over and pulled the covers up over his head. Gwei. I don't want to get up. Temari giggled and shook his shoulder again. He would never be a morning person, of that she was sure. Naruto, come on. We have to go to Konoha, remember? He sighed and rolled over, his blue eyes blinking up at her. Do we have to? Can't we just lay here together and maybe they'll forget we were supposed to go? I doubt it. Now get up and get dressed. I have everything packed already, but you have to make me breakfast. She leaned down and pecked him on the lips before standing up and stretching, making sure he was watching as her shirt rode up over her buttocks. She grinned as his eyes fixated on the flesh peeking out of her panties and let the shirt fall back again. Maybe if you're a good boy on the trip, I might let you see more when we get to Konoha. Now get up. He groaned and rolled out of bed, his bare feet hitting the floor. He stretched and she winced as she heard the bones popping back into place. He must have popped every bone in his body from the force of that jutsu he used. He flopped back onto the bed and huffed. This is gonna suck. As she cinched the sash of her kimono, she watched as he swiped the seals one by one and felt the whip of the wind as he put the resistance seals back to use. A blast of air filled the room and whipped all his papers around as he sealed the ones on his legs again, and she turned back to find him huffing and puffing on the bed. Damn. That hurts more each time I do it. Can you help me up? She grasped his hand and pulled him up, noticing the slight resistance he gave her. Naruto shook himself all over and stretched his limbs, getting used to the resistance the seals gave him again. When he was satisfied with his movement again, he grabbed her by the waist and pulled her in for a kiss. Temari melted into the kiss and stood on her tiptoes while he held her. She was actually quite glad for their trip to Konoha. At least there, she would have a few hours a day alone with him, she hoped. She whined when he broke the kiss and tried to renew it, but he held her back. Her eyes opened and she glared at him. You're the one who said we had to go, Temari-chan. She stuck her bottom lip out and smacked his arm hard before leaving out the door. Hurry up and make me breakfast. I'm hungry. Naruto snickered and followed behind her. As you wish, dear. I want pancakes. Blueberry. And bacon. He sighed and trudged off to the kitchen. Yes, dear. I want some bananas and peanut butter. Temari looked down at her feet and blinked. Where did you come from? Your room. Since my spot on the boss bed was occupied. Fine. The rat wants bananas. Bimbo. Flea farm. Can we not do this morning, guys? No. No. All the Konoha ninjas waited at the gates for their final two guests. Gaara waited beside Tsunade with his arms crossed, still supremely unhappy that the Uchiha was being taken back to Konoha. He had told Tsunade that the rest of his team would not be released into Konoha's hands and would stay in Suna. He was still unsure of their fate. More than likely they'd be killed and their bodies studied for any secrets they could glean from them. The group hushed as Naruto and Temari walked up, chatting merrily with each other, Sanzoku draped around Naruto's neck. Temari had insisted upon a big breakfast and had not eaten until Naruto sat down with her, and as such, they were a tad late arriving to the gates. When Naruto saw the bound and blindfolded Sasuke in the back of a wagon, tied to a post so he couldn't move, Naruto scowled as he walked up to Tsunade, all signs of happiness gone. What is he doing here? Tsunade sighed and turned to look at the slumped-over Sasuke. He's going back to stand trial for his crimes, Naruto. The grimace did not leave his face as he walked past her to report to Gaara. She heard his mumble as he walked by though. Should have killed him when I had the chance, she sighed unhappily and made her way over to the rest of her ninjas. She didn't know if it would be a pleasant trip or not. Naruto bowed to Gaara and smiled as he straightened up. I guess I'll be back sometime, Gaara. I don't know how long this will take. Are you sure you're all right with Temari coming along with me? Gaara looked over Naruto's shoulder to where Temari was chatting with Tenten and sighed. She'd just follow you anyway against my orders. Besides, I can't very well let you go alone, can I? You might decide not to come back. At least she'll drag you back even if you don't want to come home. I don't think my coming home will have to be a forced issue. I have a home to finish here after all. I'll see you soon, Gaara. Gaara took Naruto's offered hand and grasped it firmly. I know you will. And let no harm befall my sister Naruto, or harm shall befall you. Naruto quirked his eyebrow and smirked. Are you threatening me again, Kazekage-sama? Gaara grinned wickedly and narrowed his eyes. No, I'm promising you. Take care of her. Naruto chuckled nervously and once Gaara let go of his hand, spirited away toward where his girlfriend was. Gaara crossed his arms again and cut his eyes when he felt Kankuro walk up beside him. You tell him what would happen if Temari got hurt? Yes. How'd he take it? He ran and hid behind her. Kankuro snickered and locked his gaze on the Uchiha in the wagon. He's going to be trouble, you know. We shouldn't have turned him over to Konoha custody. Gaara let out a deep breath and nodded. I know. But he is their rogue ninja, not ours. His fate is in their hands. I just hope to Kami that they do the right thing. Kankuro watched as the group began to move out across the desert at a brisk pace, Lee pulling the wagon containing the prisoner. So do I. There had only been one incident on the trip back and Tsunade was grateful that Kami had answered her prayers of as few problems as possible. As the gates of Konoha came into view and the Chunins ran about to make everything presentable for her and her distinguished guests, she thought back to that first night they had stopped. With Lee pulling the wagon containing Sasuke, they had made good time on their way back. They stopped in a small clearing just off the road and set up a perimeter. Team 10 would be on guard duty the first night and the other teams would rotate until they reached home. Sasuke required at least 2 people to watch him at all times, and Lee and Neji had volunteered the first night. Tsunade had been happy throughout the evening. Naruto was being pleasant and wasn't sulking about going back home. Her smile slipped a little when she remembered that he didn't consider Konoha his home anymore, but it came back when he called her Bachan and she gave a half-hearted swipe at him. As long as he was smiling, she was fine. Jiraiya sat beside her and they watched the boys play a round of poker. She itched to play, but decided against it. She really didn't want to put her infamous bad luck up against Naruto's ungodly good luck. She and Jiraiya opted instead to chuckle as one by one the rest were cleaned out by a hapless Naruto while Temari cheered him on. She was thankful to Hinata for the girls' excellent cooking, having been dreading the usual camp fare. Hinata didn't have much to work with, but the things she could do with a little rice, vegetables, and meat was wondrous. She watched as Tenten cautiously fed Sasuke while Lee and Neji stood at his side, glaring down at the boy. When the Uchiha was done, Tenten scuttled away and back to more comfortable ground with the rest of the group. Temari was chatting with Hinata that she simply had to let Naruto cook for her and Hinata nodded happily. She informed Temari that they would be staying with her so they could see what she had done with Naruto's parents' house. This exclamation delighted Temari since she had always wanted to know more about his parents. The camp hushed for a moment when Lee and Neji strapped metal cuffs to both theirs and Sasuke's wrists and stretched a chain between the cuffs so that Lee had Sasuke's right wrist bound to his left and Neji had his right wrist bound to Sasuke's left. Neji turned to the group and frowned. We're taking him to relieve himself. We'll return shortly. Tsunade nodded and Niji nodded back before the veins around his eyes bulged and he led the way off into the bushes. Tsunade quietly made her way to Shino and put her hand on his shoulder. Shino did not turn around, but she caught the quirk of his eyebrow. Follow them. Make sure he doesn't try anything. If he begins to try to mold chakra, have your bugs drain him. Shino nodded slightly and walked off into the shadows, disappearing quickly. Tsunade walked back to where Jiraiya was listening to Naruto and Irika swap class stories and sat down beside him. The old hermit didn't look at her, instead speaking out the side of his mouth. You sent Shino? Yes. He's the most suited for this. He is ruthless and won't hesitate to take the Uchiha down if he tries anything. Jiraiya nodded and smiled. Let's hope he tries something then. Niji had led them nearly a quarter mile from camp and halted suddenly, Sasuke nearly bumping into him. They had refused to take the seals off his eyes, instead letting him stumble over the roots and potholes in the ground. With his Byakugan active, Niji had noticed Shino as soon as he appeared behind them but had said nothing, opting instead to keep walking as if nothing was awry. He kept his eyes on Sasuke as he and Lee stood just a little off to the side. He cursed his all-seeing eyes as the Uchiha unzipped his pants and began to relieve himself, but kept on target. His eyes widened when he saw the subtle flip as Sasuke began to make the signs for a katanjutsu and he ran to the left calling out to Lee as he did. Lee! Run right! Lee grit his teeth and took off to the right. He didn't get far before the chain snapped him back around and he heard a loud popping noise followed by a scream. The party fell to a hush when the scream was heard and remained silent for several minutes. Shino emerged from the forest behind Tsunade and whispered in her ear. She nodded and it wasn't soon after that Niji and Lee appeared, dragging a screaming Sasuke behind them. Tsunade looked over to Ino and thrust her head in the Uchiha's direction. See why he's screaming and fix it. Ino nodded her head and walked over to where Sasuke lay groaning, leaning down next to him. She looked up at Lee and Niji, who stood stony-faced. What happened? Lee was unapologetic in his response. He tried to perform a jutsu and I jerked his arm out of socket. Oh. Is that all? We can fix that, no problem. Hold him. Lee held Sasuke and braced himself while Ino grabbed his dislocated arm. Alright, on the count of 3. 1-2 with a wrench, Ino put the arm back in place and winced when Sasuke screamed again. Once the pain dulled, he began to curse and yell. Ino moved away from him as Niji stepped forward again and hit a pressure point, knocking the boy out. I remember now why I didn't like him. It was his mouth and attitude. He reminds me of me years ago, except without the foul mouth. A chuckle went through the camp and they tied Sasuke back to the post in the wagon. Tsunade closed her eyes and barely caught the whisper of Naruto as he leaned toward Temari. We should have killed him in Suna. I'm sorry I didn't stay awake to finish the job. That had been quite a night, but there were no more incidents of note the rest of the trip. When Sasuke woke up, he was given food and drink and Niji promptly knocked him out again. It wasn't healthy, but Tsunade didn't really care about her prisoner's health at the moment. She sighed as she approached the gate and saw the council ready to greet her. She had hoped that they would be able to sneak in unseen, but that was apparently a pipe dream now. Turning her head slightly to see if Naruto had noticed, she winced at the overly noticeable frown marring both his and Temari's features. This could be ugly. The party stopped outside the gates and the council stepped forward with Koharu and Hamura at the head. The two were showing their age now very clearly. Koharu had more wrinkles and her jowls now looked like a bulldog's and Hamura leaned heavily on a cane. They smiled at Tsunade and bowed as low as they could. Hokage-sama, welcome back. We hope your trip was eventful. Tsunade followed decorum and bowed back before she spoke. More than you can imagine. Uzumaki Naruto returned with us to speak with the council and we brought back one of our missing nin that we picked up in Suna. Koharu gasped and took a step forward. Which one did you return? Tsunade called out over her shoulder. Lee. Remove the bag. Lee swiftly pulled the black hood from Sasuke's head and the crowd gasped when they saw the young Uchiha. A murmur went through the crowd and Tsunade frowned. Sasuke's return was not supposed to overshadow Naruto's, and she turned to find his face like stone. It was nearly impossible to read him, but she could tell that he did not enjoy being ignored, as was evidenced by his walking through the gate with his arm laced in Temari's. Tsunade watched him walk and called out. "Naruto, where are you going?" He stopped for a moment and turned his head. "I'm going to my safe haven when I was a child." Hamura coughed into his hand and tapped his cane on the ground. Namikaze-san. Naruto rounded on him and was in front of him in a second. "Never say that name to me. You idiots took that name from me. My name is Uzumaki." Hamura frowned and leaned on his cane. "Fine. Uzumaki-san then. We require your presence in the council room. Now." Naruto turned his back on the older man and took Temari's arm again. "I am not at the beck and call of this council. I am a Sunagakure ninja, my girlfriend and I have been on the road for days, and we are going to relax. You can call on us at a later date." Hamura tapped his cane on the ground again and a few chunin stepped in front of Naruto with apologetic looks on their faces. One he did not recognize took a defensive stance and bowed his head. "Uzumaki-san, please don't make us do this. That is enough." The assembled ninjas turned to the voice to find an enraged Tsunade with an unamused group of ninjas behind her. The Hokage raised her hand and a group of ANBU landed beside her. "Hamura, we will have this meeting when I am ready. I am tired, as are my companions. The council is at my beck and call, not yours. I've let all of you have more say so than I should have for too long. ANBU, escort the Uchiha to the lowest levels of the dungeon and let no one in to see him that does not have the right authorization." She smiled at Naruto and Temari and waved them on. "You two enjoy yourselves. I'll send for you when I've arranged the meeting. Naruto, Temari, remember you'll be staying at the Namikaze mansion with Hinata. I'm sure you remember how to get there." Naruto nodded and grinned at her before dragging Temari off. Tsunade turned around and waved the Konoha ninja away before facing the council with a frown. "The rest of you are dismissed. I want to see the council in my office in an hour. We need to discuss your boundaries apparently." The two hadn't been walking very long when Sanzoku yawned and uncurled himself from Naruto's shoulders and hopped to the ground. "I'll just go catch a ride with Hinata-san to her house. I'll meet you all there." Naruto nodded distractedly and Sanzoku leapt to Temari's shoulders, speaking in a hushed voice. "Watch him carefully. Make sure no one starts anything. We can't afford an incident here." Temari nodded and watched as the red panda waddled off down a side street, before she heard the laughter of children and he came streaking back out and down another, with a gang of kids behind him. She laughed and let Naruto drag her off. Temari watched Naruto carefully as they walked the streets to wherever they were going. It was eerie how the people treated him. In Suna, they could walk the streets and no one would bow or wave, even though they knew who they were. In Suna, Naruto and Temari were just a normal couple outside of missions and wanted to be treated like everyone else. The people of Suna respected that and even appreciated it. After all, no one likes a snob. But the people of Konoha were treating Naruto like he was royalty and it was bothering him. She could tell, because of the tightening of his arm around hers and the scowl that was ever deepening on his face. The only time he lightened up was when a young child came forward. He would smile and say a few kind words and send the child on its way. She asked him why he did that with children and he gave her a sad smile. Children should not pay for the sins of their parents. She almost tackled him to the ground and kissed him right there. It was how he treated all children, anywhere and everywhere. It wasn't right to demonize a child because of something their parents did. It wasn't the kid's fault if their parents were bad people, it wasn't their fault if their parents did bad things, and it wasn't their blame to take if the parents wronged society. That's what Suna had done to Gaara. That's what Konoha had done to Naruto. And neither would ever truly forgive their home village totally. "Naruto, where are we going?" He smiled at her and pulled her a little closer. "We're going to my special place, a place I used to go when the weight of the world got too much for me. Let's get there quick then. These people are starting to creep me out. It's beautiful." I can see why you came up here. Naruto sighed and flopped down cross-legged on the ground, pulling Temari down into his lap as he wrapped his arms around her waist. The view of Konoha was dazzling as sunset washed over the village and gave the horizon an pink and purple glow. He rested his chin on her shoulder and sighed. The view isn't why I came up here. It was to talk to them. Them? The Hokages. Temari's mouth formed an O and she nodded her head before sadly turning back to the front. Naruto smiled and kissed her neck, gaining a groan of contentment from her. You have to understand, Temari-chan, I didn't have anyone for the first 12 years of my life. Even Gaara was never truly alone. Even if he hated everyone, he still had you guys. All I had were the Ikarakus, the Sandaime, and the Hokage monument. She said nothing, just listening to him. Naruto never really talked much about his past and she couldn't blame him. But this would be good for both of them. She could support him and he could get things off his chest. When he squeezed her tighter, she laid her head on his shoulder. I would come up here and talk to the Hokages of the past about my troubles. I wouldn't get an answer, but every now and then, when I was really troubled, a warm wind would kick up and envelop me, almost like a hug. Gigi told me it was the past Hokages giving me comfort and I desperately believed that. It was almost like they could feel my pain. And I loved to come here when it rained and cry because no one could hear me and the rain cascaded off the Hokage monument and it looked like they were crying with me. Especially my father. Temari nuzzled into him a bit more, extremely saddened by what he was telling her. His story was so similar to Gaara's and yet so totally different. You have to understand that no one tried to kill me like they did Gaara. That would have meant that I was worthy of their attention. They ignored me instead. If I fell down when I was little and cried, they just walked around me. If I needed help in school, no one would teach me. If I was hungry, no one would sell food to me, except for the Ikarakus. That's why I grew to love ramen so much. It was a comfort to me. He smiled and looked over the monument in the direction of his favorite restaurant. I don't think my being the container for the kyubi was any bother to them. It was more the fact that I inhaled food and they needed the money. If I didn't have enough to pay, they'd forward the bill to Gigi and he'd take care of it. To me, they were the nicest people in the world and it didn't matter who I was. They smiled at me. Temari thought to herself that she would be sure to stop by and thank the Ikarakus for their kindness toward her boyfriend as a small smile graced her face. I know to most that Gigi didn't do much for me. But what little he did was a godsend. He gave me a roof over my head and clothing to wear. He made sure I didn't go hungry. And when he could, he stopped by to say hello. It wasn't much, but to me, who didn't know much kindness, it was heaven, those little short visits. All his attention was on me. Temari smiled as he stood both of them up and giggled when he brushed off the backside of her kimono. He was too considerate at times. Naruto eased an arm around her waist and walked them to the edge of the cliffs. But you know what, Temari-chan? I wouldn't change my life at all. Not a thing. She stared at him in disbelief and he pulled her around so that she was facing him. But why? His answer was to lock his lips with hers and she melted into the kiss as their tongues danced around one another. A small tear escaped down her cheek and she wrapped her arms around him tighter. When they broke the kiss, she was flushed and panting slightly. He gave her a heartwarming smile and enveloped her in a hug. Because if I changed anything, I might not have met you, Temari-chan. And then we wouldn't be together. You mean the world to me. Temari's chest tightened and she leaned back so she could look into his eyes. The love for her that she found there was overwhelming and she buried her face in his chest. You're an idiot, but you're my idiot. Naruto leaned her back and planted a kiss on her forehead before grinning and pulling her close again. Wanna try something fun I learned to do after I found out I was a wind type? Temari blinked and squeaked when his grip on her became ironclad. The grin on his face worried her. Naruto, what are you planning? His grin only widened as he kissed her again. Ever thought about flying, Temari-chan? What do you? Before she could finish what she was going to say, he flipped her into his arms bridal style and crouched low, before leaping into the air. She felt the sensation of weightlessness as they reached his peak and then the gut-wrenching terror and thrill as they plummeted to earth. Naruto. What the hell are you thinking? His reply was to laugh heartily, and she made a note in the back of her mind that if she lived through this, she was going to kill him. No, she couldn't kill him. Then who would bake delicious desserts for her? She'd break his legs instead. The ground was coming up fast and Temari closed her eyes, dreading the inevitable. Her eyes opened to find them only 100 feet from the ground and she squealed, shutting them tightly again. Only a couple more seconds, when nearly 10 seconds went by without the jarring feeling of Naruto landing on his feet or them splattering on the ground, she felt a soft breeze waft by her face and slowly opened her eyes once again. The ground was right below her, only 3 inches from her nose, while a cushion of air distorted her vision. She blinked and turned her head to find Naruto grinning like an idiot. Hee, gotcha. Her response was to pull her right arm back and slug him in the face as hard as she could, sending him flying away into the bushes, and she landed hard on her stomach. With the adrenaline still running through her system and high on the thrill, she stalked off into the bushes and found him quickly. With a growl she leapt onto his stomach, straddling him as he lay on the ground and grabbed the collar of his shirt, hoisting him up so that they were nose to nose. You idiot. You unmitigated fool. What would have happened if you hadn't cast that jutsu at the last second? But Tima, shut up. I swear I'd kill you if you weren't such a thrill to be around. What do? She silenced him by crushing her lips to his, the thrill of the ride she'd been on still coursing through her and making her need him at the moment. There was a growing heat in her belly as she attacked his lips. Naruto was surprised at first but quickly gave in and allowed her to do as she wished. He slowly ran his hands up and down her sides, making her shiver with delight, and then pressed her to him while his hands rested right above her round bottom. Temari pulled back, panting, slightly disappointed that he refused to touch her in naughty places. She reached up to pull her kimono apart and was stopped by Naruto's hands. She gave him a pleading look and whined piteously. No, Temari. Not here. Tears came to her eyes. She needed release so badly it hurt. But I want it. I want it badly. I need it. He wiped the tears away with his thumbs and drew her into a gentle kiss. Soon, Temari-chan, soon. But not out in the woods. She grabbed him by the collar again and shook him. Why not? He laughed and grabbed her hands, pulling her into a hug. Because I want our first time to be special. She huffed and nuzzled into his chest, pouting the whole while. It would have been special. You'd be my first. And you'd be mine. Now let's go to where we'll be staying. I'll make you dinner and a cake. She sniffed again and nodded as he helped her up. She noticed, however, that he did not say, let's go home. That brought a little happiness to her. He considered Suna home. Hinata was waiting for them as they walked through the door and greeted them cheerfully. Welcome home. I have dinner ready. Naruto nodded, but Temari caught the wince when Hinata said home. She ignored it for the moment and looked around the room. This place is beautiful, Hinata. What did you have to do to get it to look like this? Just a little work. Everything you see was in the home already. The beautiful wooden wall panels, the hardwood floor, even the luxurious furniture. It was all here. I just had to do a little cleaning. Temari nodded and grinned sheepishly when her stomach growled. Hinata giggled and motioned for them to follow her to the kitchen. Naruto was surprised at the cleanliness of the place. It made him somewhat sad that this house that had belonged to him was in Konoha the whole time and he had never known of it until his final days. Hinata had done well in sprucing the place up. Dinner was a simple affair. Hinata had insisted upon cooking and made a wonderful meal. Beef, chicken, fish, rice, and vegetables. Temari and Naruto had their fill and insisted on helping to clean up. When supper was finished and all the dishes put away, Hinata excused herself and said she was spending the night at the Hyuga clan house. When asked why, she gave a small smile. I would imagine you two would like a little alone time. I'm sure you don't get much of it in Suna, and I don't want to be a bother. I'll stay in the clan house until you leave. The blonde started to protest, but Hinata would hear none of it, insisting that she had to go. They watched as she walked away from the property and Naruto shut the door. "Well, shall I show you around the house?" Temari nodded her head and he led her down the hall. They stopped in the living room first and she admired the beauty of it, the simplicity and the elegance. The next stop was to look out the back door at the small training area and the rocks where the hot spring used to be. Hinata had told him that they simply had not had time to pipe any water into it yet, what with restoring the house itself, but that it was in the works. The house was smaller than he remembered, but maybe that's because he was overwhelmed the first time he was there. His parents obviously had been frugal folks, not needing anything bigger than the small house. The bedrooms were all the same and they checked the vault to see if he had missed anything the last time. It was empty. Their final stop was the bathroom and Naruto admired the tile and the extra large tub when he heard the click of the door lock and turned to see Temari smiling at him sultrily. "Why did you lock the door?" "Because I'm going to take a bath and you're taking one with me." His throat tightened as she stepped toward him swinging her hips. "But Temari-chan, no. You stopped my fun earlier today. Now you're going to help wash me. And we'll see how long you can keep your hands off me when I'm presented to you." Naruto gulped and shucked his shirt, blushing as Temari turned around and looked over her shoulder. "Undo my sash for me. I can't reach the bow." With shaky hands he reached out and undid the bow slowly. Unbeknownst to him, Temari was trying to steady herself as well. Sure, she was bold and she'd slept with him, but neither had seen the other totally nude before. She only hoped that she would be appealing to him. A gasp came from him as her kimono slid off her shoulders and to the floor, revealing her in all her glory. She subconsciously covered her breasts by crossing her arms when she heard him speak. "You're beautiful." She blushed and she just knew that her entire body was as red as a tomato. She slowly turned to face him and uncrossed her arms, trying to fight down her nervousness and get back some of her bravado. "All right. You've seen me. Now drop your pants and help me prepare the bath." Naruto didn't hear a word she said. He was too busy drinking in everything about the beauty in front of him. The soft patch of hair nestled between her legs, the way her breasts bounced slightly when she took a step, the roundness of her belly, the curve of her hips. His eyes wandered back up to her face and he blinked when he found her right in front of her. He blushed further when he felt the sensation of his pants sliding down his legs and his boxers following. Temari reached around and slapped him on the butt, making him jump slightly as she grinned. "Get him off and help me make the bath. I'm not warning you again." He nodded dumbly and followed the sight of her buttocks as she walked over to the tub and turned on the water before he walked to the cabinet and got out the soaps and some of Hinata's scented candles. He hoped this would appease her because he was nervous as hell. Temari shook slightly as she ran the bathwater and it wasn't because of a chill in the air. She'd seen what he was packing and while he wasn't the biggest she'd ever heard of, he was no slouch either. She knew where this could lead to and she was hoping on that. After their make-out session earlier, she had had a dull fire in her belly all afternoon, like an itch that she couldn't scratch. She knew what she needed, but she was nervous. What if she wasn't any good? What if he didn't like it? If she'd only known that the exact same thoughts were going through Naruto's head at the same time. With the bathwater the right temperature, they climbed in and Naruto sat behind Temari as he washed her back. He could feel the tension rolling off both of them in waves and could feel her muscles tighten as he ran the washcloth over her bare back. He decided that maybe a massage would help both of them relax. He'd given her massages before and they seemed to relax both parties greatly. Without stopping his ministrations on her back, he reached around to the counter where he'd found a bottle of scented oil and popped the cap open with one hand. Temari was trying to loosen herself up when she felt something cool land against her shoulders and the washcloth disappeared to be replaced by Naruto's bare hands. It took her a second to realize that he was massaging her and it felt really good. She rolled her head and sighed slightly, enjoying the familiar feeling. "Naruto, what brought this on?" "I just thought since we're both so nervous a massage might help us." "It doesn't feel good?" "No, it feels great." Don't stop." Temari leaned back into the feeling and felt herself begin to relax. Unfortunately, the more she relaxed, the more that heat in her belly came back until she couldn't help herself anymore. With half-lidded eyes, she turned around in the tub and pressed herself against a surprised Naruto, smothering him with a kiss. The feeling of her nipples pressed against his chest and her warm tongue mashed against his was overloading his system. In like fashion, Temari was having a bit of a problem herself. With the way she was leaned against him, his stiffness was rubbing against her bundle of nerves, and every time she rocked, it sent shivers up her spine. She realized that if she didn't break the kiss soon, she was going to come. With great reluctance, she broke the kiss and the two faced each other, panting hard. "Okay, my turn to wash your back. Turn around." Naruto was glad to comply since he was close himself and it would help hide his throbbing member from Temari for the moment. When she began to scrub his back, he let out a sigh of relief and began to relax a little more. When he felt the cool globs of oil hit his shoulder, he nearly melted as her talented fingers danced across his shoulders and upper back. He didn't feel her as she smirked and began to work her way down to his chest, so she could look over his shoulder. Temari looked at his hardness with a sense of want and need. She couldn't remember wanting anything more in her life than she wanted Naruto at that moment. She rubbed her chest against his back a little harder and stifled a giggle when she felt him gasp and moan slightly. With a smile she crept further south and rubbed his stomach over his seal. Naruto groaned when he felt her slender fingers rub the seal. It had always been a sensitive part of his body and he felt himself twitch as her hardened nipples pressed and rubbed along his back. If this kept up, they'd end up doing it for eyes snapped open when he felt those familiar digits wrap around his member and he looked to his right to see Temari smirk. "Temari-chan? Shoot, you want this as much as I do. We've waited long enough to show each other our love. But are you sure about this?" She captured his lips in a deep kiss and let go with a loud popping sound. She smiled when she felt him jerk a little in her hands and slowly slid up and down. "I've never been more sure in all my life. Let's just have fun and relax." She watched with fascination as he closed his eyes and moaned while she slid her hand up and down. She reached back and pulled the drain on the tub, letting the water out until it was just below his erection. Naruto didn't even notice when she slipped around in front of him, but he did notice when she licked the tip of his penis and his eyes sprang open as he looked down. Temari looked up at him shyly but continued her pumping motion. I've read about this in books and saw a movie once, so please just try to enjoy and tell me if it feels good, okay?" Naruto was about to tell her that she didn't have to do that when Temari licked along the underside of his shaft before sliding her lips over the head and slowly slid downwards. Naruto grunted and fisted his hands in her hair, resisting the urge to thrust forward to get more of the wonderful feeling. Temari didn't have much talent, but she made up for it in enthusiasm, licking and sucking all over him. It wasn't long before Naruto began to see spots in the corner of his vision and grabbed her hair a little more firmly. "Temari-chan, her response was to grab onto his thighs and suck harder. Naruto grunted and spilled his seed into her mouth, breathing heavily as he looked down at Temari while she cleaned up any overspill. "Temari-chan." Temari looked up as she stuck a finger in her mouth, cleaning up a little more when she found herself thrown back and landed in the water with a splash. She looked up over her stomach to find a red-faced Naruto between her legs. "Now let me do you, Temari-chan. Tell me if I'm doing it right, okay?" She was about to answer when he dove into her and her back arched up out of the water, her mouth open in a silent scream. It only took Naruto a few laps at her bundle of nerves before she came all over him, but he didn't know what had happened and kept going. The pressure that had been building up all day had compounded while she was sucking him and his insistent lapping sent her over the edge. She had no time to rest, however, as he continued licking and sucking and she began to tremble. "Naruto, please no more. I can't." He didn't hear her, too wrapped up in the heavenly scent and the fact that he was making her feel good. Temari writhed in blissful agony as more pressure built up in her loins as he nipped and sucked at her folds. With a few heavy, shaky pants, Temari screamed and grabbed his hair hard, shaking like a leaf in the wind. Naruto had not been ready for the torrent that entered his mouth, but gulped it down greedily anyway. It tasted distinctively of Temari, and he could never get enough of her. He crawled up through her legs and held himself above her with his arms before kissing her deeply, the water making lapping noises against the side of the tub when they disturbed it. Temari was caught off guard by the taste of her own juices, but relished the kiss nonetheless. There was only one more blockade and the two would be full-fledged lovers. She pushed Naruto away and smiled up at him. Let's go to the bedroom and continue this. I want to be comfortable when we make love. Naruto nodded and drained the tub before helping an unsteady Temari to her feet and holding her while he toweled her off. She loved the feeling of the soft cloth against her now sensitive skin and squealed when he threw the towel aside and picked her up bridal style. They shared a passionate kiss, bumping into the walls on the way to the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed, still lip-locked. Temari broke the kiss with a smacking sound and pushed him onto his back. He lay there confused as she straddled his waist. Temari-chan? She braced her hands against his stomach as she hovered over him. Her hands moved and glowed slightly before she placed them against her stomach and winced. She gave him a look of longing and spoke softly. I broke my hymen in training a long time ago, so we don't have to worry about that, but it's still supposed to hurt. I've read that the girl being on top gives her more control over the feeling, so just lay there and let me get adjusted, okay? You're pretty big, so don't move. He nodded and watched as she grabbed a hold of him with one hand and lowered herself gently. When she felt his head touch her lips, she took a deep breath and began to sink. The splitting sensation was painful like they'd said, and she bit her lip so hard she drew blood. She was thankful they'd done a little foreplay beforehand, as that had loosened her up quite a bit, but it still wasn't enough. She gasped when a jolt of pain went through her and Naruto held her waist to keep her from going any lower. Does it hurt? Do you want to stop? No. I don't want to stop. The pain will go away. It's just there for the first few minutes. Just let me adjust slowly, okay? He nodded and lay back again, wincing at the feeling of her tightness around him. He'd heard from Jiraiya that kunoichi especially have muscles that normal girls don't have, and this was evidence of it. He heard her whimper as she slid lower still until he felt her skin come to rest on his, their hairs intermingling as she leaned over and kissed him again. It doesn't hurt so much now, but let me do all the work, okay? Before he could reply, she rose back off of him to the tip and then went back down, her pace ever increasing. After several moments of this, Naruto began to notice that her whimpers were replaced by pants of pleasure and her eyes were half-lidded. He decided to be bold, and when she came down, he thrust upward. She squealed with delight and he sank back to the bed. Temari looked down at him with lust-filled eyes and growled. Again. Do it again. He didn't need to be told twice, and every time she came down he would go up. It wasn't long before they both were shaking with pleasure and Naruto sat up, wrapping his arms around her waist. Temari-chan, I'm gonna come. Me too. Me too. Boo-hoo. They both released themselves at the same time and she slumped against him as he pulled the covers over them. They kissed again as she sleepily nuzzled her cheek against his chest. That felt so good, Naruto. I've needed that for so long. It was good for me too, Temari-chan. The best ever. You're my goddess. She giggled and nestled up against him, yawning cutely. I'm not up for more right now, flatterer, so you'll have to wait for tomorrow. He chuckled and kissed the top of her head, holding her tight against him. Of course, sweetie. Whatever you say. I love you, Naruto. I love you too, Temari. They fell asleep in contentment, no longer just boyfriend and girlfriend but now lovers of a wild new degree. Young love is such a precious thing, and when two people who truly love one another make love, the feeling is multiplied and compounded that much more. Hinata had come into the house early the next morning and checked up on the lovebirds, wrinkling her nose at the smell and sighing as she saw the mess in the bathroom. I'm so glad I stayed at the clan house last night. She went about cleaning up the bathroom and then went downstairs to make breakfast. Naruto woke up when he smelled bacon and looked down at the naked girl nestled into his side, smiling as he shook her awake. Temari, wake up. Hinata's cooking breakfast. She sleepily wrapped her arms around him tighter and smiled in her sleep, speaking with a sleepy slur. If you want to try anal, we'll do it later. I don't have any lotion right now, Naruto-kun. He blushed and shook her harder, trying not to think about what her dream might be. She yawned and rubbed her eyes as she sat up. She stretched and he tried not to tackle her when her perky breasts bounced up and down. Something smells good. Good morning, honey. Morning to you too, sweetie. Sleep well? Best I've ever slept. Must have been the teddy bear I was hugging. I doubt that had anything to do with it. Come on and get dressed. Hinata's cooking breakfast. Can we get a quickie in? No. You suck. Yeah, but you're better at it. He barely dodged the pillow thrown at him. They got dressed quickly and padded to the kitchen where Hinata stood in an apron. Good morning, you too. Did you sleep well? They nodded and she doled out a helping of oatmeal to them with bananas and nuts sprinkled in. The three chatted amicably until a knock was heard outside the door. Hinata answered it and took the letter from the messenger, closing the door behind her. She silently handed the letter to Naruto. He ripped it open and read quickly. It was a summons to the council's chambers, and he was to come immediately. He frowned and turned to Temari. What's it say? It's a summons from the council. It says I am to come immediately and alone. She frowned and he smiled at her. What? You didn't think I'd listen to them, did you? You're coming with me. She shot him a disbelieving glance and snatched the letter up, reading it quickly. But Naruto, it clearly states that I'm to come alone, yada yada yada. I'm not a Konoha ninja, so I ain't doing jack squat they tell me to do. Now let's get decked out, full dress as ninjas of Sunagakure. We have a meeting to attend. Temari smiled and nodded her head, and Hinata watched as the two went back to prepare. Only back for a day and already causing trouble. It's like you never left, Naruto-kun. The council all looked up when the doors to their chamber were thrown open and two people walked in. They were quite a sight. Temari was dressed in her finest black battle kimono, her headband around her neck, and her battle fan fastened securely in place. The scowl on her face screamed that she was not to be trifled with, and several in the council room gulped at the fierce expression. But it was the other blonde who intrigued them. Naruto stood in the doorway in his beige pants and black button-down shirt with a mesh, long-sleeved undershirt on underneath. His black sandals had been shined to perfection, and he was proudly wearing his Suna Chunin vest. His headband was tied to his right arm, while his hair hung limply. It was not his clothes that worried the council members, though. It was the expression of pure disdain on his face that looked so out of place. Perhaps they had made a mistake in calling him here. But it was too late for regrets. Naruto and Temari strode to the spot before Tsunade and both bowed deeply. Tsunade smiled and nodded her head before turning to Hamura. The floor is yours, Hamura-san. I hope you know what you're doing. Hamura frowned and stood up, leaning against his cane. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Uzumaki Naruto. You were to come here alone. Naruto frowned and stood with his back a little straighter. I brought a representative from Suna with me. She will listen to these proceedings and give me counsel if I need it. So you are saying you are incapable of independent thought? Naruto growled and fisted his hands. If this council would like to continue to have an audience with me, then it had best damn well watch its mouth. I didn't come to Konoha to be insulted. I have a class back home to teach and other duties that I must fulfill. I don't want to be here in the first place, so say what you have to say and be done with it. Hamura scowled and nodded his head. Tsunade had informed them ahead of time that they held no power over Naruto any longer, and that if he so wanted, he could walk out of these proceedings. With a sigh and a nod, Temari was given a seat next to Naruto, and all was quiet. Very well. Let this meeting come to order. The purpose here is to speak with Uzumaki Naruto about his status as a Konoha ninja and his duties as the son of a Hokage. Chapter 19, could you repeat that? I believe I had something crazy in my ear. Hamura sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He could tell this wasn't going to go well. We wish to talk to you about your status as a shinobi of Konoha as well as your duties as the son of a Hokage. You have rights and privileges. Naruto narrowed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. That I don't want. I'm no longer a Konoha ninja, so there is no status that you speak of. As far as my lineage, he gave them a smile and laced his fingers behind his head as he looked at the ceiling. I'm an orphan, a parentless child. I never knew who my parents were. We thought we knew at one point, but it was a decision of this council that the conclusion we came to could not be right. Therefore, I've given up all searches and have decided to just use the name given me by the Sandaime Hokage. Hamura rose from his seat and rested his hands on the table, leaning forward. That was a mistake. A terrible, grievous error on our part. We are willing to make amends to right the wrongs of the past. Naruto locked eyes with Hamura and the elderly man gulped silently. Those eyes were not kind. The blonde spoke slowly and with a low voice. There are so many sins of the past that not all can be totally forgiven nor bought off, councilman. I suggest you let someone else speak before I get up and leave. Hamura huffed and sat down in defeat. Koharu stood next, trying her grandmotherly charm. Naruto-san, surely you can't begrudge us everything that was done to you. You have to understand extenuating circumstances, Temari snorted and Koharu turned her attention to the blonde girl. Something you would like to add, young lady? Temari suddenly felt very self-conscious, but cleared her throat to speak anyway. My village was just as bad as Konoha when it came to the treatment of my brother. The only difference is that my father tried to have Gaara killed on multiple occasions. But there was still resentment and fear, anger and mistrust when he became Kazekage. And there is still some form of it in the older crowd today. The big difference is that we never denied the heritage of Gaara. Koharu narrowed her eyes at the girl. Are you implying that we willingly denied the heritage of this young man? Temari turned her chin up in defiance. Can you deny the charge? She reached over and grabbed Naruto's face, framing it in her hands as she turned his head in all directions. Look at him. He has the body structure and hairstyle of his father and the facial structure of his mother. He's an amalgamation between the two. How could you not see it? She leveled a glare at the entire council. The reason is you didn't want to, because that would have meant acknowledging him as someone of importance. Naruto fidgeted and Temari cut her eyes to look at him. He blinked and gave her a sly grin. You can let go of my face now, dear. Temari blushed slightly and pulled her hands away slowly as she turned forward in her chair again. Sorry. Don't worry about it. Koharu looked upon the scene the two had made, a small smile on her face. She had never seen the boy so at ease with another person. She decided to take the grandmotherly approach again. You must care for him quite a bit to stand up to a foreign council like that. That takes bravery. I remember being that in love at one time. Hamura snorted from his seat and Koharu glared down at him, hushing him up. She turned back to the two blondes with a smile again. What you said is true, young lady. We did deny his heritage for the longest time and that is quite possibly one of our most terrible mistakes. We drove away a son of Konoha in our ignorance. But we wish to make amends now. We wish to fix our mistakes. Will you not let us try? Naruto tapped his index fingers on his crossed arms and sighed heavily. Koharu was a master at using her age and grandmotherly act to get what she wanted. Not many could say no to her when she made a request. But most weren't him. You were all there on the night of my birth. Why didn't any of you help me? Why put me in an orphanage? Why deny me a small measure of happiness? Why make me be alone? Koharu's eyes grew saddened and she suddenly looked and felt her age. Sarutobi knew what your life was going to be like. He may have been an idealistic fool, but he was also a realist on some points. He knew that if the world knew of your true heritage, then they would come running to either kill or kidnap you. You're the last of the Namakazes and the Uzumakis, and while you may deny your heritage on one side, you cannot deny that their both clans' blood flows through your veins. She sat back down in her chair gingerly and leaned her head on her hands. There wasn't much we could do. The villagers all knew who you were, even if they convinced themselves differently. It was hard to miss you. No one else has the blinding hair color of Minato or the exuberance of Kushina. It was too hard to see you and be reminded of who and what we had lost. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Naruto just stared at the elderly woman with a bored expression on his face. He was not going to give in to whatever they wanted. Anything else you have to say? Koharu, seeing she had made little to no ground, shook her head and waved her hand. No. There's nothing else. Someone else can speak if they like. Naruto looked around to each council member and found that none were willing to speak up. He smirked and patted Temari on her leg. Well, if you have nothing else to say, then I'd like to know about your new abilities. Naruto froze halfway out of his seat and met the eyes of Aburame Shibi. The sunglasses-clad man just stared back impassively. Naruto scowled and flopped back into his seat. I don't know what you're talking about. Shibi pushed his sunglasses further up his nose and cocked his head slightly. My son has informed me that you have gained certain abilities that could be beneficial to Suna and her allies. I just wish to know what you are capable of. Naruto's brow furrowed and he vowed revenge on Shino for his big mouth, although he was sure that all of his friends had told their parents about his feats and the entire village knew by now. Oh well. It was bound to come out sooner or later. What do you wish to know? Inoichi spoke up, now quite intrigued. Ino spoke to me last night about something you called the green? What is that? Naruto closed his eyes and groaned loudly. Temari reached over and squeezed his arm for comfort. Normally it would calm him down, but he was too irritated at the moment. He had to remind himself that he represented Tsunagakure in this situation and he couldn't afford not to be diplomatic. He was already riding the border for rudeness, and had he been anyone else, they would have tossed him out on his ear. He stood from his seat and walked to the large, plate-glass window. He pointed to a patch of dirt in the main pathway of the market district, one where grass had not grown in years due to the amount of traffic. See that patch of dirt? The council members all stood and looked at where he was pointing. Naruto closed his eyes and felt the source flow through him as he directed it on what to do. The council members' eyes all grew wide as the street erupted into chaos when fruit trees of all types burst from the ground, sending merchants and shoppers scurrying for cover. Naruto opened his eyes again and smirked. That's a small sample of what I can do with the green. He heard several whisper that it was Mokuton and shook his head in a negative. It's not Mokuton. It's something else entirely. Nara Shikaku, his interest now piqued, focused his entire attention upon Naruto. If it isn't Mokuton, then what is it? There aren't any records I'm aware of that mention someone just being able to draw on such a power without having senju blood in them. Naruto just continued to look out the window as several people cautiously approached the trees. He noticed, with some dissatisfaction, that there were several extremely ragged-looking people that were upon the trees in a second, picking them clean. It was a gift, you could say. No, it's more like a responsibility that I now shoulder. Just one more in my life. It started out with me delving into some scrolls I found and ended with me being the guardian of this power. That's all I can tell you. Shikaku scowled and started to say something, when he caught the stern look Tsunade was giving him. He sighed and muttered under his breath as he returned to his seat. The man simply hated not knowing all the pieces of a puzzle when one was presented to him. Tsunade motioned for everyone to return to their seats while Naruto remained standing at the window, still watching the people below. Naruto, we need to get this going again. Return to your seat, please. He sighed and crossed the floor, plopping down beside Temari again. He gave her a weary smile, promising to himself to make this up to her later tonight with a night on the town. Casting a bored look around the room, he offered himself up for more inquiry. Psum, surprisingly, was the one who spoke up. That red panda that you had draped around your neck when you entered the village, where is it and what is its purpose? Is it a summon or a familiar? Naruto cursed mentally and shook his head. It seemed that almost all of his secrets would be divulged here. He gave a start suddenly and looked around the room. Temari, where the hell is Senzoku? He didn't come in with us. She merely shrugged and crossed her legs again. I dunno. That rat doesn't do anything that could be considered normal. He's not very far off, that's for sure. Want me to call him? Yeah. He seems to respond quickly when you bait him. Temari grinned and rose from her seat, walking across the room to the door while the council watched with interest. She cracked the door and poked her head out. Sanzoku. Get your furry ass in here. The council all winced at the volume of her voice, and several quirked their eyebrows until they heard the voice of the summon. Keep it down, you psycho bitch. I was trying to take a nap. She glanced down the hallway and saw him on one of the benches. Giving him a smirk as he waddled up, she cracked the door more to allow him inside. About time you showed up. Where the hell have you been, flea bait? Waiting for you to finish your little soiree. I hate meetings. The council all leaned forward over their table to watch as the red panda waddled into the room and climbed the back of Naruto's chair to rest on his shoulder. Sum smiled as he wound himself around Naruto's shoulders and yawned loudly. It reminded her of Akamaru when Kiba was younger. Sanzoku, was it? Might I ask how Naruto came in possession of your contract? I've never heard of a raccoon summon. Sanzoku lazily looked up and blinked before yawning again. The raccoons wanted him, so we contacted him. Not like he had a choice in the matter. It was like Jiraiya with the toads. There is a purpose to him helping us, and vice versa. It's an arrangement that benefits both sides. Sum grinned and nodded. She could understand the "you scratch my ears, I'll scratch yours" arrangement. How are you able to stay in our realm though? I was under the understanding that summons could only stay as long as their chakra remained. I performed a blood ceremony of sorts under the supervision of Tsubasa-sama, the Raccoon King, so that I could remain with Naruto and guide him. It doesn't hurt that he rarely needs our help in battle, although I'm always happy to help. Hayashi focused his eyes on the summon and tried to find any deception. Would you harm Konoha? Only if Konoha tried to harm Naruto or me. I don't take kindly to deception or such things. I only put up with Temari because the boss likes her and she's not a bad chick besides. Temari crossed her arms in a huff and looked away as she mumbled. Love you too, you overgrown plushie. Sanzoku was growing weary of all the seemingly mindless questions and propped his head on top of Naruto's, yawning again while he nestled into the bristly blonde plumage. Is that all you need of me, councilwoman? I see no point to these questions. Sum frowned and nodded her head. She had just been curious. Tsunade, seeing that this was merely dissolving into a grilling of what Naruto could and could not do, rose to her feet. If there are no other questions or anything of the sort, I'd like to call this meeting to a close. We have accomplished nothing. Hamura slowly rose to his feet and locked eyes with Naruto. I just have a few more things to say, and then they can go if no one else has anything to add. Naruto stared with bored eyes, resisting the urge to yawn as Sanzoku snored into his ear. Hamura leaned against the desk and sighed heavily. We messed up, Naruto. We really did. There were so many different and better ways we could have handled your situation, but the sad truth is we didn't. If I could go back, I'd fix it. But I can't. Do you still deny your blood relation to your father and mother? Naruto nodded his head solemnly, and Hamura groaned to himself. You wish to stay in Sunagakure? What of your parents' house and land? What of their bank holdings? What about their history? Do you wish to leave all that behind? Naruto could see the man trying to subtly guilt-trip him again and remained steadfast. Why should those things matter to me so late in life when they were denied to me back when I needed them? I know what I need to know, and that is enough. I owe no allegiance to Konoha anymore beyond what our alliance with you dictates. I only agreed to this meeting because my Kage said that it would probably benefit me, but all we've done is beat around the bush. Hamura looked to Koharu as she stood, her bones creaking wearily. What about your dream to be Hokage, Naruto? Did you not promise Sarutobi that one day you would take his position? Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly and mentally thanked Temari when she placed her hand on his arm and squeezed slightly. He didn't really know what he would have said if she hadn't been there as a calming presence. That's a low blow, councilwoman. Yes, I promised Gigi that I'd take his hat from him. I couldn't do that when he passed on. Some dreams just weren't meant to happen. Even I realize that. I have other dreams now. Koharu looked at him sadly and put her hands behind her back. Is there nothing we can do to convince you to come home? Nothing at all? Naruto looked at Temari and smiled as he laced his fingers with hers. She smiled back and he squeezed her hand. Suna is my home now. I have everything there that I could ever want. You couldn't offer me enough of anything to come back to Konoha now. Is there anything else? The council all shared looks and shook their heads. They had nothing else if he just couldn't be convinced. They couldn't force him or that would nullify the treaty with Suna, and they knew Gaara would act against them immediately, if Temari didn't kill them all first. Before anyone could move, Tsunade called their attention to her. Since the council is gathered, I have one last portion of business to call to attention. Uchiha Sasuke. Everyone, including Naruto and Temari, took their seats again. Tsunade looked around the room with hard eyes. You could almost cut the tension with a knife. Uchiha Sasuke is one of our most recognized criminals. I stopped you all from leaving because I want to determine his sentence as soon as possible. Naruto ground his teeth, but kept his mouth shut. As unfortunate as it was, he had no say anymore in Konoha business, a double-edged sword in this case. It was a privilege to even sit in on this at the moment. He and Temari would just have to keep quiet. A quick glance at his girlfriend found her in a similar state of distaste. Tsunade wasted no time in going for her verdict. I say we should execute him. He has been nothing but a thorn in our side since he left, and even before then he was bad news. All in favor? All but Hamura, Koharu, and surprisingly, Hayashi raised their hands in favor of execution. Naruto expected it of the two elders, but Hayashi? Tsunade was apparently of the same mind. Care to explain yourself, Hayashi? The Hyuga head nodded and stood from his seat. Everyone knows of the animosity between the Hyuga and the Uchiha. Sadly enough, every one of them is either dead or has gone rouge. But Konoha simply cannot lose that power if it can help it. Shikaku snorted and lazily leaned his head against his closed fist. Oh, I dunno. Seems we've done pretty well without them for some time now. Hayashi glared at the man, who only looked back boredly. While it is true that we have not had any true Uchiha here, it can be argued that Hatake Kakashi's Sharingan is one of the most valuable assets we have. He is constantly bringing in new jutsus and forms to share with his fellow ninjas. This is invaluable in keeping ahead of the other villages. The Sharingan is a valuable commodity. Akimichi Chiza grunted and leaned back in his seat. The normally easygoing man was suddenly the center of attention. What about loyalty being a commodity? If I remember correctly, that boy would have sold his soul to the devil for a fucking Twinkie if it would have gained him power to kill Itachi. He's tried several times, and each time his bid has failed. He's a traitor, and traitors don't get special consideration, no matter who they are. If you treat one special, then you have to give them all that option. Everyone around the table nodded in agreement, and Hamura leapt to Hayashi's defense. But what of the powers of the Sharingan? If we were to take samples from Sasuke and selectively breed willing women with his DNA, we could have Sharingan wielders who are loyal to the village. There are ways to go about this. Tsunade was mortified that he had even dared mention that. That was something Danzo would have gone for, had the old bastard not passed on of a heart attack. Yes, a simple, dignified heart attack. I can't believe you suggested that, Hamura. Impregnating women to get those eyes? That's ludicrous. We might never even see them come to maturity, since there are special situations that activate the eyes. And what of the famed Uchiha madness? No, we won't do that. Koharu remained seated and spoke quietly. What of the curse seal? It could have tampered with his mind, and that could be the reason he left. Naruto could no longer keep his mouth shut. You're grasping for straws now. The fact of the matter is that Orochimaru could have laid cookies that said power for free, this way on the ground, and Sasuke would have followed willingly. He was always unstable. Hamura glared at Naruto and set his jaw. I'll thank you to keep your mouth shut here, Uzumaki. You don't really have a say in Konoha matters anymore, seeing as you're a shinobi of Suna, after all. Be glad we even tolerate you here. Naruto narrowed his eyes and rose from his chair, thoroughly sick of being cajoled to, and then talked down to like he was 5. Listen here, you old goat. That man in prison right now is one of the most unstable, dangerous people alive. He deserves to be executed for all his crimes against Konoha and her allies. He tried to invade Sunagakure. He should have got the death sentence there and his head mailed back to you here. It was only dumb luck that saved him when we fought. Hayashi snapped his head in Naruto's direction. You mean to tell me you tried to kill him when you two fought? Naruto gave the Hyuga an incredulous stare, as if the man had grown two heads. Hell yeah. He was trying to kill me. He's just lucky the feedback from his right jutsu didn't fry his ass. I overloaded my futon jutsu as much as possible to overcome his. Hayashi gave a short laugh, which startled everyone in the room. Not willing to take a beating to make a point anymore, Uzumaki? I must say I'm impressed. I didn't think you liked to kill. I don't. But I like dying less. I have too much to accomplish to let someone like him take me out. Hayashi nodded and tucked his hands inside his robes. Tell me, why do you think he deserves the death penalty? Naruto scoffed and gave Hayashi a hard look. You tell me why he doesn't deserve it. The head of the Hyuga clan sat for a moment before nodding his head and turning to Tsunade. I would like to change my vote to death. We need to send a message to our missing ninja abroad and those who would become them that we will not tolerate such endeavors. Uchiha Sasuke will be our prime example. Tsunade nodded and turned to the two eldest on the council. It's just you two left. We need a unanimous vote for the death penalty. Tell us why you don't think he should be executed. Koharu bowed her head and stood, looking out over the council. I believe it to be a valuable waste of resources. The Sharingan has long been a contingency of Konoha, and it should remain so. Naruto snorted. Even when they're a den of traitors and murderers? Koharu glared at him from her seat. You were asked to stay quiet, Uzumaki-san. Do not have us remove you and Temari-san from these proceedings. Tsunade slammed her hand onto the desk. As the one who Sasuke attacked, I believe he has every right to sit in on this meeting, if for no other reason than he is the one who brought him down so we could even entertain the thought of trying him. Don't mistake him for a bystander in all this. Hamura fidgeted in his seat for a moment before making his thoughts known. Hokage-sama, I believe that your close proximity to Uzumaki-san has made you somewhat lenient toward him and his opinions. Perhaps if he were removed from the room we could discuss things in a more civil manner. Tsunade laced her fingers and rested her chin upon them as she gazed about the room. My relationship with Naruto is not in question here. Nor are my issues with this village's need to put Kekkei Jinkais on a pedestal above others. We are here to decide whether or not Uchiha Sasuke should be put to death. You two are the only thing saving him at the moment. Prove to us that he shouldn't be put executed. The Sharingan is inconsequential. It has not been in this village for years now. The Sharingan is not a factor in this currently. If that is all your requirements for him to live, then he is already at death's door. Other arguments? Koharu and Hamura whispered amongst themselves for the moment and decided to turn the tables on the others. Convince us instead that he deserves to die. Tsunade smirked. Their desperate ploy would not work. Perhaps when they heard the list of his crimes Shikaku, Chuza, Tsume, and Hayashi all stood, letting Shikaku speak first. When Sasuke first turned from Konoha and went to Orochimaru, our children followed him. They were nearly killed trying to retrieve him. They fought with opponents far better trained, the bodyguard of Orochimaru himself, and came out on top, but not without nearly dying. My son drained his body of all its nutrients and almost died to hold back one of Orochimaru's guards, just to retrieve one unworthy genin. My son was willing to commit suicide to kill one of Orochimaru's guards, just to retrieve one unworthy genin. My nephew almost laid down his life to ensure that one of Orochimaru's guards would not join the fight with the others, all for one insignificant genin. My son fought a battle of wits with a girl who could control the Oni themselves, and sought to draw out his soul until Temari-san came to help him. All in the name of Konoha. Not for the sake of power. Tsunade nodded her head to the four and they sat down. She turned to the two elders and gave them a questioning look. Is that enough to assuage you? Hamura sighed heavily and closed his eyes. They went on your orders, as shinobi of Konoha. Death is a reality in our profession. They were to retrieve Uchiha Sasuke and failed. Tell me, councilman, what is the price for betraying one's country? Hamura turned to Naruto, surprised by the question, but gave a textbook answer. The price for traitorous actions against one's country is death. Naruto raised his chin slightly, his eyebrows raised in question. What then, councilman, have we all been arguing about? The room went silent and all heads hung in silent introspection. Koharu's quiet voice broke through like a rock through glass. Death. Hamura let out a slow deep breath and nodded his head. Death. Tsunade let out a sigh of relief and sat back heavily in her chair. Death. The rest of the council members murmured the word in turn, fully realizing the implications it might have. Tsunade declared the decision final and the members all filed out of the room one by one. Naruto and Temari stayed behind, their heads bowed low. Jiraiya, you can come out now. A shimmer was seen by the wall and the toad sage emerged from his spot by the door, his face grim. He crossed the room to where Tsunade stood and nodded to her. This won't go over well, you know. The civilians will more than likely protest. Tsunade gave him a grim grin. Then they can protest all they want. I am Hokage and what I say goes. They have no say in military matters. Besides that, he serves to die. Betrayal should not be taken lightly. Everyone thinks that Konoha will welcome back its missing ninjas, with open arms like nothing ever happened. No, this is the price of betrayal. Death. Jiraiya nodded and turned to where Naruto stood with Sanzoku around his neck and his arm around Temari's waist. Tsunade smiled at the couple. I'm sorry that this was all a waste of your time. I hope you plan to stay for a while though. Naruto smiled and nodded his head. Yeah. We were kind of hoping you'd let us stay for a while, kind of like a vacation. There are a lot of things I'd like to do while I'm here. Everything is on my bill, you too. Enjoy yourselves. Now get out of here. I have an execution to plan. Jiraiya, you stay. As soon as they were outside, Temari kissed Naruto on the cheek and leaned into his side. You did great in there, babe. Gaara would be proud of you. Naruto grunted, still staring forward. Temari frowned and laced her fingers in his. Are you okay with all of this? She felt and heard him sigh as they searched for a restaurant. That council meeting was a complete waste of time as far as I was concerned. When it came to getting a dangerous criminal off the streets and out of everyone's lives, though I think we had a very good day. She cut her eyes to the side and frowned slightly. Naruto, are you okay? He stopped in the street and turned his head to face her. I don't know. Sasuke deserves to die. I would have killed him in the heat of battle if I had only had a little more power. But an execution, I dunno. It just doesn't seem sporting. Temari chuckled and pulled him along again, in search of sustenance. All the more reason for us to leave before they execute him. I don't want it on your conscience. Now come on, I'm starving. She walked a couple of steps and then stopped. I just remembered something. Where the hell is that staff of yours? Naruto grinned and held his hand out over the ground. His staff erupted from the earth and into his waiting hand. He thrust it back into the ground and it seemed to dry up and wilt away. It goes wherever I go. Don't want to give away all my secrets. Temari just sighed as he gave her a cheeky grin before taking his arm in hers. Despite Naruto's protests, Temari eventually convinced him to take her to a decent restaurant, although he had to admit once they'd got there that the food was excellent. After an enjoyable meal, filled with laughter and loving looks, they stepped outside and planned their next move. Well, we've already seen the Hokage monument and the bottom of it. A quick slap on the arm from Temari made him grin. I guess we could go visit Irika, unless you want to go do your own thing. I'm sure you know where all the sites are here by now, Miss Ambassador. Temari looked around to see what section of the district they were in. I was kind of hoping to go shopping, especially since Hokage-sama is paying for everything. I can meet back up with you at your parents' house later. Or at the hot springs. A nice dip would be lovely. Naruto chuckled and pecked her on the lips before turning to walk away, throwing a look over his shoulder. I'm going to visit Irika at the academy. I'll see you tonight. Temari smiled wistfully as she watched him walk away before entering the door of a clothing shop. Oh, you'll see me tonight, alright. Naruto reached up and rubbed Sanzoku's ears as he walked the streets, trying to ignore the adulation and happy smiles the people threw his way. In his younger years, he imagined that this is what he wanted, but after seeing it, it only sickened him. The knowledge of his birth was the only thing that made these people even look at him. The only ones he smiled at were the children, too young to know what his name meant. To them, he was just someone their parents said was near royalty, and that they should respect him. Naruto couldn't begrudge them for that. They were, after all, only children. Sanzoku leaned into his hand and cracked an eye open, keeping his voice low so no one could hear them speak. That was quite a shindig back there. I'd never have imagined they would put the Uchiha to death. Nor would I. I would have imagined he would have gotten life in prison or some bullshit like that. Sanzoku nodded his head. How do you feel about it though? Does it feel like it's finished? That it's over? Naruto sighed and turned a corner, aiming straight for the academy. He could see the small arch announcing its presence in the distance. It won't be over until he's dead and in the ground or burnt to a crisp. I have a bad feeling about all this. He should be killed immediately, not made a public spectacle. Sure, a public execution looks better, but there are too many things that could go wrong. Such as? His little flunkies could break out and save him. He might have other allies who would come to his rescue. He might somehow overpower the seals put on him by Jiraiya. There's lots of shit that could happen. Sanzoku puffed himself up and smacked Naruto with his tail. You're being pessimistic and worrying over nothing. Konoha has agreed to execute him, and Tsunade seems like the kind of person who would go through with it no matter how unpopular a decision it is. Naruto smiled as they walked through the arch and into the schoolyard. I guess you're right. We won't be around to see the execution anyway. They usually have at least a 1-month reprieve to allow the condemned to sweat it out. Mental torture at its worst, but it's no less than what he deserves. Let's see what Irika's up to. As Naruto wandered down the halls of the school, his memories of the place flooded back to him. They weren't very pleasant, but he did have some fond ones. Ditching class with the guys, torturing poor Irika on a daily basis, skipping class to paint the monument, yeah, he had some fond memories. He found his old classroom and heard Irika giving a lecture on the other side. He hated to crash the man's class, but the kids could probably use the distraction. He smiled wistfully as he thought of his students back home. They probably missed him by now. Most teachers didn't teach like he did after all. He slid the door open and Irika froze immediately upon hearing the sound, years of being a ninja sharpening his senses. Unless it was an emergency, that door shouldn't be opened. He turned, expecting the worst, and blinked when he saw Naruto. What are you doing here? Naruto grinned and stepped inside. Just came to see how you're doing, sensei. Are you still giving those boring lectures? I thought we discussed this back in Suna. Irika grinned back, but caught one of his students waving his hand frantically out of the corner of his eye. Irika-sensei. Is that really Namikaze-sama? Naruto frowned and Irika winced. He knew Naruto hated to be called Namikaze, as it left him feeling very bitter toward Konoha. Naruto's frown was swept away immediately and he grinned at the cadet. Can't help it that the child is ignorant of those facts after all. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, not Namikaze. You've been misinformed, young man. I'm a Chunin teacher in Sunagakure, so the Sama isn't needed either. You can just call me Naruto-san, okay? The boy cocked his head to the side in confusion. He seemed to speak for the whole class. But I thought your name was Namikaze. My dad says that your dad was the Yondaime Hokage, so that would make you a Namikaze, right? Naruto's smile slipped a little. My name is a touchy subject, boy. I'd just suggest you do as I say and call me Naruto-san, alright? The boy nodded and Naruto smiled at the kids again. So, what has Irika been teaching you all? Boring history and theory, no doubt. Iruka coughed into his hand and sent a mock glare at Naruto, who just shrugged him off. I'll have you know that those are vital parts of a ninja's development. Not all of us can be powerhouses like you, Naruto. Just because you're on par with most Kage doesn't mean the rest of us are. The kid's eyes went wide and demands permeated the air. How powerful are you? What can you do? Show us a move. Naruto put his hands on his hips and gave them all a hard glare. Be still. The kids were immediately quiet and Iruka gave him an appraising look. There weren't many who could command such a presence or respect from the children. Perhaps he should look into some of Naruto's teaching practices. Naruto looked around the class slowly, locking eyes with each student. You should all respect your sensei better. Iruka is a good teacher. He taught me after all, and look where I am today. Don't speak out of turn and don't disrespect your sensei. Naruto, you did plenty of that when you were a student of mine. The blonde groaned in exasperation, causing the kids to giggle as he turned to Iruka. Man, now look what you did. I had them ready to kiss your ass for eternity and you had to go and ruin it. Iruka waved off his former student's glare and the two smiled at each other before Naruto turned back to the class. Now, raise your hand and I'll call on you to ask a question. You first. Iruka watched as Naruto mystified the class with his answers. Yep, definitely going to have to take up some of his teaching style. Temari had just come out of the clothes shop with a surprise for Naruto, when she found herself surrounded by 4 girls of varying hair color. The blonde sighed and closed her eyes. Alright, what do you want? Ino grinned and flipped her ponytail back over her shoulder. Why Temari, I'm hurt that you would think we would want anything from you. We just happened to be walking by and saw you and thought we'd have a friendly chat. Just a friendly little chat. Temari snorted and shifted her bags to a more comfortable position. She knew where this was headed. I'm sure. If you'll excuse me, I need to go put these bags away. Sakura smiled and held her hand out. We're free the rest of the day. Let us help you carry them. Hinata invited us back to her house for tea anyway. Temari cringed on the inside but nodded her head, silently swearing to kill Hinata when the chance presented itself. She knew somehow that this was the quiet girl's fault. Tenten tapped her on the shoulder and she turned to the girl with a blank stare. Temari, how are things between you and Naruto? Are they hard or is it all easygoing? Sakura and Ino giggled until Temari threw them a glare. She was not having fun at the moment. Hinata saw her uneasiness and cleared her throat. Maybe Temari would like to just be alone. She and Naruto don't have much alone time in Suna, I believe. Temari threw the girl an appreciative look until the other 3 shook their heads. Nonsense. They have plenty of time while they're here. Besides, Temari needs to spend a little more time amongst us girls. She's always coming and going, she never has time to relax. Actually, I was planning on going to the hot springs with Naruto this evening. She rolled her eyes when the 4 girls sighed dreamily. Sakura clasped her hands together. That sounds so romantic. I wish I could have a guy sweep me off my feet like that. They didn't catch Temari's smirk. You could have if you just opened your eyes, dumbass. Ino snapped her fingers and began to push Temari forward. I have a great idea. Let's go to the spa and have a girls' day. You said you're meeting Naruto this evening, correct? Come on, we have so many things to ask you, share with you. Temari sighed and let herself be dragged along. At least she would get a free spa treatment out of the deal. She couldn't remember the last time she'd pampered herself. Temari leaned back against the wall of the sauna with her eyes closed. All in all, it hadn't been a bad evening. She had a couple hours before she was supposed to meet Naruto, and the girls hadn't grilled her too bad. She cracked an eye open slowly and cursed herself when the eyes of all 4 girls met hers. Sakura sidled up alongside her and propped her feet up on a stool. So, Temari, how is it having Naruto as a boyfriend? It's good. He treats me like a princess most of the time. I have to remind him that I'm not royalty. Ino rested her elbows on her knees and cupped her chin in her hands. How's the sex? Temari spluttered and stared wide-eyed at the girl while the other three glared. Tenten smacked the girl in the head, making Ino glare at her. Ino! You didn't have to be so abrupt about it. What? I wanna know. It's not a hard question. She turned back to Temari with a grin. Well? The other three, having had the question on their minds, leaned forward as Temari groaned in defeat. At least it was girl talk. If any of them ever told anyone, she'd chop them into such little pieces that no one would ever find them. Okay, fine. It's great, okay? It's awesome. Ino squealed in delight and plopped down in front of her on a stool. Details, details. How big is he? Temari jerked her head back and crossed her arms under her bosom. I'm not telling you that. Tenten gave her a pouting face and poked her bottom lip out. Ah, come on, pretty please? We'll keep it a secret, we swear. Wait, he's not tiny, is he? Temari scoffed in indignation. No, he is not tiny. He's perfect for me. Sakura grinned, seeing a little prodding was needed. So he's tiny. He's 8 inches, okay. You happy now? Tenten and Ino whistled appreciatively while Sakura giggled. Hinata just poked her fingers together and blushed, thinking about what it might have been like if she and Naruto had gotten together. Temari huffed and sat back against the wall. Anything else you'd like to know? Tenten grinned slyly and slowly brought her head around to face Temari. Yeah. Ever tried anything kinky? Like roleplay? Temari blanched. She didn't like where this conversation was turning. Naruto yawned as he and a frazzled Senzoku left the classroom, waving goodbye to Irika. He scratched the poor red panda's ears, trying to comfort him. The kids had been all over him when they discovered he could talk, and all the girls insisted on hugging him like a toy. Senzoku was not pleased, but Naruto forbid him from biting or crushing any of the kids. He had stayed to talk to Irika after class and had enjoyed himself immensely. Senzoku had lounged on the desk, trying to rest up from his day of being fondled. He didn't even put up any resistance when Naruto lifted him from the desk and draped him around his neck like a scarf. Naruto had swung back by his parents' house to get his robe and a towel, totally perplexed by the appraising and coy look Hinata gave him. He chalked it up to a weird girl thing. He certainly got enough weird looks from the girls in Suna. He smiled at the receptionist and paid his way in, asking if she'd seen Temari. The girl informed him that she was down the hall and to the left and that she had hired out one of their private baths for their use. Naruto thanked her and went on his way. Senzoku hopped down and curled up on the bench outside the door, saying he would keep watch. Naruto knew he was just going to take a nap. He stepped inside the bath and was met by Temari standing at the edge, wearing a long robe. He smiled at her and she gave him a smirk as she undid the sash on her robe, flinging it open. His jaws dropped when he saw what she was wearing. Temari thanked Tenten silently as Naruto looked her up and down. The girl had forced her to go back to the shop and bought something a little more risque than the nightgown she'd bought. She let the robe drop and turned around, bending over and looking over her shoulder, with a mischievous glint in her eye. Oh doctor, I need some help taking my temperature, and not just any thermometer will do. Naruto grinned and kicked the door shut behind him as he began to shed his own clothing. Tonight was promising to be very fun. He waggled his eyebrows and whistled. Well, hello nurse. Tsunade waved the guards aside as she and Jiraiya, followed by the entire council, made their way to Sasuke's cell. They found him chained to the wall, his shirt in tatters, his head hung low. He looked up when they saw him enter and he chuckled. So, come to free me, eh? I told you, Hokage-sama, your council couldn't waste my talents or my birthright. They all remained silent as he stood to his feet and shook his head. Tell Ibiki that he's getting old as well. It felt like someone's grandmother was trying to work me over instead of an interrogator. Tsunade smirked, making a mental note to tell Ibiki what was said. The man had a month to work after all. I'll pass that along to him. But we're not here to release you. We're here to tell you what your sentence will be. Sasuke's smirk died down slightly. What then? Community service? A slap on the wrist? Or confine me to my clan house for a few months, before putting me back on light-duty missions? Tsunade snorted. She was going to enjoy his shock immensely. Your sentence is death. In 1 month, we will publicly execute you by beheading. He stood still for a moment before snarling and lurching against the chains. You can't do this. I'm an Uchiha, one of the last. You can't kill me. The Uchiha can't die. Tsunade rushed forward, planting her fist in the boy's stomach. He spit out blood and fell to his knees. Tsunade caught him on the way down and whispered in his ear. We warned you in Suna that things had changed here. Your name means nothing now. Your blood means nothing. Your eyes mean nothing. You betrayed us all for paltry power, and now you'll know the price of betrayal. You have 1 month to think on your sins and try to find some peace with the kami. She rose from her kneeling position and walked past the council. They turned one by one and followed her back out. Sasuke finally found his voice and screamed after them. You can't do this. I haven't killed Itachi yet. My vengeance is not complete. Jiraiya stopped at the door, his one hand resting on the frame. He turned back to look at Sasuke, who still had fire burning in his eyes. Now you know how it is to be at the mercy of someone on a whim. I believe you told my student one time that you spared him on a whim and that you would take his life on a whim. His life meant nothing to you. Know now how worthless your life is to the rest of us. Jiraiya walked out the door without a glance back. If he had, he would have seen the maniacal glint in Sasuke's eyes. They'll come for me. Someone will come for me. My vengeance is not complete. I cannot die until he is gone from this world. The guards shivered when they heard the insane laughter coming from the cell. What kind of man could laugh when he'd been told he was going to die? Chapter 20. Temari groaned as the light filtered in through the curtains. She threw her arm over her eyes to block out the offending sunbeams, but it was to no avail. She had to admit to herself that sleep was no longer possible. That didn't mean she had to get out of bed though and leave Naruto's warmth. The blonde rolled over to her side and wrapped her arms around Naruto, sighing happily into his back. This is what she had always wanted in a relationship. Total happiness, total comfortability, and most importantly, unconditional love. The only thing she wanted more than this was a family of her own, but that was all in good time. Being that close to someone so warm was making her sleepy again, and it didn't take long for her to yawn and her eyes to begin to droop. Still, she held on, fighting to stay awake. Her thoughts became more and more sporadic the longer she fought off sleep. For some reason, lying there with Naruto like that brought her back to days when she was younger and her mother was still alive. Her mother had been so kind, so caring. She had doted on Temari and then Kankuro when he was born, calling them her two precious little angels. She began to think then of how her mother had changed when she was pregnant with Gaara and turned her thoughts away from the woman. In all reality, she didn't have many loving thoughts of her except for the first 2 years of her life. When they implanted Shikaku into Gaara while he was still in the womb, her whole demeanor had changed. Perhaps the Shikaku had been speaking to her as well. Temari shuddered at the thoughts and squeaked when Naruto suddenly rolled over and latched onto her, pulling her close. She rubbed her cheek against his chest and closed her eyes again. She could envision herself having a life with this man. She could be happy, truly happy. She would be loved and doted on. She would want for nothing. And of course she'd get the occasional dessert. As her eyes grew too heavy to stay open, she sighed happily and kissed Naruto before drifting off again. What more could a girl want? Naruto had been awake from the time that Temari had wrapped her hands around his waist from behind. He simply didn't want to disturb such a peaceful moment, and when he rolled over and embraced her, it was simply because he had to have her in his arms. Sappy? Yes. But such is love. As Temari's breathing became more rhythmic, his thoughts wandered to what had happened while they'd been here. He had denied his heritage, basically spit in the face of a governing body several times, and listened as his former best friend was sentenced to death. There was just one thing bothering him. That 1 month reprieve. He frowned and rubbed his chin on Temari's soft, frizzled hair. She twitched her nose and squeezed him tighter. He smiled down at her and kissed the top of her head. Tender moments like these never lasted in the ninja world. That 1 month reprieve bothered him mightily though. It simply wasn't good business. Sasuke was too dangerous and too valuable to too many people. What if the Sound heard about it? Surely they'd come running, and what would Itachi think? He had to have left Sasuke alive for some reason. Naruto shook his head and lay back against the pillow again, letting Temari lie on top of him. He had never thought it possible to be so comfortable with someone, yet here he lay with someone who loved him. He chuckled into the cool morning air. Love. It had at one time seemed so far away from him. Now he had love in his arms, and he didn't intend to ever let go. He looked out the window, the curtains slightly apart so he could see Konoha. He'd never imagined that he would ever see his birthplace in such a light. It wasn't home anymore. Home is where the heart is, and his heart lay with Sunagakure. And most importantly, with Temari. A yawn from below made him look down and into the teal eyes of his blonde goddess. You're thinking too hard again, Naruto. Your face is all scrunched up with concentration. She giggled when he glared at her and leaned up to plant a kiss on his lips. What she had meant to be the first kiss of the day ended up being a marathon of who could hold their breath the longest. Both won and came up for air at the same time. She sighed happily and watched as he sat up in bed, leaning against the headboard. Her head found its way to his lap and she looked up at him. I don't suppose there's a way we could just stay here forever? He shook his head sadly. Nope, sorry. But I'll tell you what. I'll promise to make every morning like this if I can. How about that? She yawned and stretched her arms over her head, smirking as she pinched his side and made him jump. I think we need to get up. I don't want to, but I'm getting hungry and I don't think Hinata's coming over to cook. So that leaves you. I want an omelette, with bacon on the side. Naruto sighed and stood up, pulling on his pants and searching around for his shirt. Anything else, Your Majesty? Yeah, fresh squeezed orange juice. He frowned and turned to face her while buttoning up his pants. And where am I going to get it? I'm not walking to the market. You can make orange trees, you dummy. Naruto grinned sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. Oh yeah. I forgot about that. He strode over to the window and opened it. Temari watched him curiously while she tied her hair back into the ponytails. Naruto stretched his hand out and a gardenia bush grew up the side of the house. He smiled and plucked 4 blooms and commanded it to shrink back again. Temari blushed as he sat down beside her and pushed the stems into her ponytails. He leaned back and observed her for a moment before smiling broadly and pecking her on the cheek before walking out the door. The final detail on the masterpiece, my dear. You've now gone from drop-dead gorgeous to incomparably beautiful. I'll have breakfast ready soon. Temari was bright red by the time he left out of the room. She shook her head quickly to rid herself of the blood rush and stood up, stretching out the kinks. Her back popped and she groaned. That felt delicious. The wind mistress crossed the room and stood in front of the antique mirror, admiring her body. She turned this way and that, observing the small scars that littered her. She would never be unmarred like Naruto, but she knew he appreciated the small blemishes. Everyone had a story. She smirked to herself. That was one thing Naruto would never have with his natural healing ability. She traced one particular one along her thigh. It was the one she'd gotten when she began her resistance training with Naruto. The smell of bacon wafted up from the kitchen and she took a whiff, letting out a happy sigh. She needed to get dressed now. She usually wore the black battle kimono, but she wasn't looking to battle anyone today, and Naruto was going casual as well with his slacks and button-down shirt. She wanted comfort above all. Naruto watched the omelet with care, making sure not to burn it. He didn't really need a grumpy Temari because he'd burned her breakfast. A clone of his was picking oranges off a tree he'd raised and another was churning them into juice. The soft padding of feet alerted him as Hinata walked into the kitchen. Naruto smiled at her and waved. Good morning, Hinata-chan. Would you like an omelet? The Hyuga heiress smiled and shook her head. No, that's all right. I had a light breakfast before I came over. Oh no, I insist. You must taste his cooking, Hinata-san. Both turned to find Temari standing in the doorway in a blue kimono, the color of Naruto's eyes, with trim the color of hers. She'd had it tailor-made back in Suna, before they came to Konoha, and she was glad she had done it now. It accentuated her beautifully. Hinata smiled at her and bowed slightly. Temari-san, good morning. You look lovely with those flowers in your hair. And thank you, but I don't want to be a burden. Temari smiled and waved her hand dismissively while taking a seat at the table, motioning for Hinata to sit. She did think she looked better with the flowers too. Plus, Naruto liked it, thank you for the compliment. And nonsense. He's more than willing and he's not a bad cook, to boot. The clones walked in from outside, one carrying a pitcher of juice, the other carrying a bowl of oranges. All done, boss. Anywhere in particular you want this stuff? Naruto shook his head and the clones winked as they sat down their burdens, before kissing Temari on her cheeks and dispelling themselves. Hinata covered her mouth with her hand as Temari turned bright red and Naruto chuckled when the memory of what his clones had done popped into his mind. He brought their breakfast over to the table, one in each hand and another balanced on his head. Temari glared at him and stood up, taking the plate off his head. Stop showing off and sit down. Hinata just watched the two with an amused smile as they bickered back and forth. Her dreamy sigh made both blondes look in her direction. What's the matter, Hinata-chan? Hinata propped her chin on her hand and looked from one to the other. I wish I had someone like the two of you. Even when you argue it's apparent how you feel for each other. Temari grinned and took another sip of orange juice. He's not all that great. I'd trade him for a candy bar some days. Hinata cut her eyes to Temari and smirked. It was so unlike the girl, yet mischief yields for no one. Is today one of those days? Temari smirked back and latched her arm around Naruto's. Not a chance. They'd left the house after chatting with Hinata for a little while longer and made their way to Naruto's old training ground. He sniffed the air, taking in the scents of the forest and smiled. This is what I want for my property. I want this scent all the time. Temari took a whiff and scrunched her nose. I'd rather have gardenias outside the window for me to smell. Or roses. Something colorful. There's too many shades of green here, not enough variety. Naruto gave her a funny look and quirked his eyebrow. So you can smell them? Why would you want to smell them? Temari gave him a hurt look. You mean you don't want me living with you? Naruto panicked and went into damage control. Temari smirked in her mind, but kept up her heartbroken facade. You're entirely too easy to tease, Naruto. But Temari-chan. I just thought. Temari cooked up some crocodile tears quickly and turned her head away. That's the problem. You think too much. It was getting to the point where she almost couldn't hold in her laughter at the lost look on his face. He really was too much sometimes. But Ayu Temari broke out into giggles and took his face in both hands, giving him a loving smile. You're too much, Naruto. I'm not angry, so stop pouting. I was just messing with you. Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It was just like Temari to mess with him like that. She seemed to take pleasure from teasing him. His eyes opened slowly and a grin crossed his face that Temari did not like at all. I hope you didn't pay too much for that kimono, Temari-chan. You're about to find it hard to wear in the future. Her eyes grew wide as he rolled back his sleeves and swiped his hand over his smallest restriction seal. The wind whipped around him and she took a few steps backward, cocking her head to the side. Naruto-kun, we shouldn't do this here. It's not our training ground and it's much harder to fix a forest instead of sand dunes. He flashed out of view and she shuddered when she felt his breath on her ear. I don't care. Temari knew she would mourn the loss of the expensive kimono later, but right now, she had to defend herself. She lunged forward just as his foot found the space where her head had been and rolled to a kneeling position, reaching behind her for one of the small iron fans that she carried on her all the time. That wasn't fair, Naruto-kun. She felt the air distort behind her again, and he wrapped his arms around her shoulders from behind. It made her feel safe and insecure at the same time. Safe, because she knew he wouldn't really and truly hurt her. Insecure, because she knew she'd have a few bruises at the end of this. He whispered into her ear again. Life's not fair, Temari. Remember, in the middle of battle, I'm no longer Naruto-kun. I'm just Naruto. He shoved her forward and she used the momentum to handspring back to her feet and released her own restriction seals. The wind rushed around her and she grinned as she put the fan before her face, obscuring the view of her mouth, and batted her eyelashes. Ah, you're so cute when you're being aggressive. It's much hotter than when you're being pacifistic. Come on, honey, show me what you got. Naruto growled playfully and leapt at her as they began to wind around each other. The force of the winds caught the attention of several ninjas, and soon the perimeter of the clearing was dotted with ninjas of various degrees. Temari spun gracefully and twirled her fan in Naruto's direction, sending a funnel of wind his way. Naruto sidestepped and let it fly by him, right toward a group of hidden chunin. He smirked and held his arm out to his side, his staff erupting from the ground and leaping into his hand. He twirled it about and pointed it at Temari. Let's see how this goes. We've never done the green versus your wind manipulation. Temari grinned and readied herself. She felt so much lighter on her feet without the restriction seals, like she could do anything. She tipped the fan in a come-hither motion and snapped it shut. Naruto tilted his chin up and slammed his staff into the ground. A tsunami of plants erupted from the ground, heading straight for Temari at high speed. Her training with Naruto had given her a greater understanding of her own power over wind, and she had become very proficient in using it. A small fan was more than sufficient for countering his deluge of greenery. The metal blade snapped open again and she swiped it forward, infusing it with wind chakra and cutting a swath through the plants headed toward her. Naruto frowned as she destroyed his small tsunami and raised his staff overhead as 4 large trees erupted from the ground, blocking the wind headed his way. He slowly stepped around the trunks and clucked his tongue. TSK, Temari. I thought you had more oomph than that. I'm disappointed. Temari growled and charged her fan with wind chakra. You're just lucky I left my battle fan at Hinata's house. I'd have already won this by now. Naruto grinned and wagged his finger at her, as if he was chiding a child, as she rushed forward, the air around the fan distorting. Naruto channeled his own wind chakra around his staff, small chunks coming off of it, and slammed it against Temari's fan. The 2 wind chakras battled each other for dominance as the 2 grit their teeth, trying to overpower the other. What the hell is going on here? Sweet Jesus nipples, do all you blondes have to be so loud? The 2 blondes looked to the side at the same time, their weapons sliding past each other and sending vortexes of wind chakra barreling towards the woods behind both of them. The wind slammed into the forest, uprooting trees and sending the hidden ninjas scurrying for cover. Naruto and Temari stood frozen as they stared at an irate Tsunade, who had a wide-awake for once Sanzoku on her shoulders. The older blonde put her hands on her hips and tapped her foot, small vibrations rumbling through the ground. Well? I'm waiting. Naruto put his staff on his shoulders, hanging his arms over it like he was carrying a yoke. Temari put her fan back into the folds of her sash and fixed one of the ponytails that had come loose. She frowned when she realized that her flowers had been lost in the fight. We were just sparring, Hokage-sama. We can't let our skills get rusty just because we're on vacation. Tsunade's tapping was getting harder. Most spars don't tear up the landscape and attract every ninja in the vicinity. The training ground is a mess, the forest is knocked down, and I'm pretty sure that some of my chunin have been hurt. Naruto sighed and took his staff off his shoulders and tapped it on the ground. Trees erupted from the ground, replacing the ones they had knocked down. You happy now, Bachan? Tsunade narrowed her eyes at the nickname. No, I'm not happy. Look at my training ground. It has scars everywhere. Naruto shrugged and let go of his staff, watching as it sank back into the ground. So, I'll pay you to have a genin team clean it up. What's the big deal? You 2 didn't have authorization to use this field. I'm still not seeing the problem. Tsunade walked forward and glared at both of them, making the two younger blondes shrink back slightly as she whispered. What if you had uprooted or crushed the memorial stone? Naruto's eyes widened and he looked at the ground, somewhat ashamed of himself. How could he have forgotten about the memorial stone? Tsunade sighed and scratched Sanzoku under his chin. Don't worry about it. I'll let it slide this time. Now, come to my office. I need to talk to you two about something. Naruto nodded and fell into place beside Tsunade, his head still hanging. Temari frowned at his hangdog look and cut her eyes to Sanzoku, who was still riding on Tsunade's shoulders. So this is where you've been since last night? Sanzoku lazily flicked his tail at her. Well, I didn't want to interrupt the two of you while you were playing. I didn't want to hear you playing either. So, I went to Tsunade's office and slept on her desk. How did you get in? Sanzoku yawned and flicked his tail again. I can get in anywhere I want to. It helps that she was asleep at her desk as well. The window was unlocked. Temari frowned at Tsunade. Hokage-sama, do you ever go home and sleep in a bed? Tsunade snorted. I'm safer at the office. There are perverts abroad and at home. At least I have guards at the office. Oh come on, Haim. I'm not that bad. Temari whirled around to find Jiraiya walking beside her. She blinked rapidly and looked to find Naruto walking as if nothing had happened. Where the hell did you come from? Jiraiya grinned and wagged his finger. That's for me to know and you to never find out, my dear. Temari scoffed and turned back to the front. Whatever, pervert. Jiraiya rolled his eyes and sighed, speaking to Naruto. You know, after being called that by you for as long as I've known you, it doesn't sting as much anymore. Pervy sage. Jiraiya hung his head. You guys suck. Tsunade motioned for Naruto and Temari to take a seat in front of her desk while Jiraiya stood behind her, leaned against the wall. Sanzoku lay cradled in Tsunade's arms while she stroked him like a cat. Naruto smirked as he sat down. I thought you didn't like Bachan touching you because she threatened your balls, Sanzoku? The red panda yawned and cracked an eye open. We buried the hatchet. Let's leave it at that. You brought her some sake, didn't you? I don't recall. Of course you don't. Tsunade cleared her throat and Temari and Naruto immediately brought their attention to her. Tsunade laced her fingers together and rested her chin on them. What do you think of Konoha's decision to execute Uchiha Sasuke? The two blondes were taken aback by the question. Temari turned to Naruto and nodded her head for him to answer. This was his field. Well, I'm surprised. I would never have thought you could convince them to go through with an execution. But why wait a month to execute him? Why not just do it now? Tsunade sighed and looked down at her fingers. It's customary for the condemned to have time to think over what they've done and contemplate their fate. Besides that, it gives the interrogation department time to weasel more information out of them. But Sasuke is too dangerous to keep for a month. What if Oto tries to rescue him? What if someone attempts to? Tsunade sat back in her chair, letting her arms fall onto the armrests. Well, Hibi won't be coming to save him. Gaara executed them all right after we left. Suigetsu was left out in the desert in that canister we caught him in. Karen was beheaded. Jugo was a tougher nut to crack. He was impervious to most pain, so Gaara just crushed his entire body. They won't be coming to help him. She looked out the window, casting her gaze over Konoha. No one will come for him. He has no allies. But that's why I have a plan. Naruto's interest was piqued immediately. Go on. Tsunade grinned and leaned forward conspiratorially. We're going to execute him early. 2 weeks early. I'll have Yamato make a platform in the middle of town and we'll parade him out and behead him. A grand spectacle that will send a message to the other Nukenin that we aren't fucking around anymore. Naruto blinked. Are you serious? You're actually going to do that? What about the council? What about protocol? Tsunade scoffed and pulled some sake out of her drawer, pouring some for Jiraiya and herself. The council can stuff it and I could care less about protocol. Following the rules has cost me a lot already. This is one time where I'm using my position and power to do some good. I'm going to rid the world of a worthless human being. Uchiha Sasuke will die. Jiraiya took his dish and downed it with a quick gulp. We want you to be there, to see this through to the end. You'll also be a deterrent if anyone tries anything. Not many would try to go against the man who took down Uchiha Sasuke. How about it? Naruto nodded his head and pulled Temari's hand into his own, winding their fingers together. We'll be there. They had been in Konoha a little over 2 weeks already, and it was the day of Sasuke's execution. Naruto and Temari, both dressed in their regular battle wear, preparing for anything that might come their way. The execution was unscheduled and only a select few knew about it. They were going to leave right after the execution, as soon as Sasuke's head touched the ground. Neither wanted to put up with the aftermath. Hinata hadn't come by that morning, so they had made up the bed and cleaned up after themselves. No reason to be sloppy guests after all. They walked through town towards the appointed spot, in the middle of the market. It was still early, seeing as Tsunade planned to do it around lunchtime. Naruto insisted they stop by Ichiraku's one last time. It was a quiet affair. There wasn't much for Naruto and the Ichirakus to talk about. He merely ate his food in silence, shook Tuchi's hand, gave Ayam a hug, and left with Temari on his arm. He could already see Yamato in the midst of creating the platform, the people milling around him to see what he was doing. Naruto and Temari stepped into the shadows of a nearby shop to avoid early detection and watched as Tsunade showed up with Jiraiya in tow, standing atop the platform with her arms crossed. The crowd was abuzz with what this meant. Then Sasuke's procession began. Silence fell over the marketplace of Konoha like a curtain dropping over a stage. Sasuke had a bag over his head as he was led to the platform and was helped up the steps. All eyes were on him as he stumbled along, led by Ibiki and Anko. The crowd gathered in close, to hear what was going to be said, Naruto and Temari in the middle to remain inconspicuous. Tsunade cleared her throat and stepped to the edge of the platform. We are here today to witness the execution of one of Konoha's most notorious Nukenin, Uchiha Sasuke. The bag was whipped from his head and the crowd gasped. It was indeed him. Several angry murmurs flew throughout the throng, upset that the Hokage would even insinuate killing him. Sasuke tried to speak, but his mouth was gagged. Uchiha Sasuke has been tried and convicted of crimes against Konoha. Betrayal in the highest, attempted murder of fellow Konoha ninjas, giving secrets to the enemy, the list goes on. He will be executed today, by beheading, by an Anbu sword. This sentence is irrefutable and cannot be overturned. As Hokage, I sentence him to death. Bring the condemned forward. Sasuke fought the whole way, his heels digging into the wood platform as Ibiki muscled him to the chopping block and threw him down. Anko helped the bear of a man stretch the boy out and held him as an Anbu stepped forward and pulled out his sword. Naruto was watching intently as the Anbu made a show of sharpening the sword while another held a chunk of wood to the side for the other to cut. They were trying to make this as intimidating as possible. Such a bore, is it not, Naruto-kun? Naruto nodded his head and thought about that voice. It seemed so familiar. His eyes popped open wide and he slowly turned his head to find Itachi. What are you doing here? Come to free Sasuke? No, I have not. I will not free him. But my master wishes for Sasuke to come to us. Naruto narrowed his eyes and growled his response. I won't allow you. I'll kill you first. Itachi cut his eyes to Naruto. I'm just here to detain you while the others free Sasuke, nothing more, nothing less. Naruto grit his teeth and readied himself. The others? Then you're all here. Why are you keeping me busy? Itachi turned to fully face him and began to unbutton his cloak. Let's just say I have a vested interest in you at the moment, Naruto-kun, and I want to find something out. The others do not matter for the moment and they have been ordered to retrieve Sasuke with minimal damage. Naruto growled and his staff rose from the ground. Itachi barely quirked his eyebrow. See? That's what I want to know about. A resounding boom and the scream of the crowd let them know that the others had begun. Itachi whipped his cloak off and put his hand on his sword hilt. So, shall we begin? Chapter 21. Naruto kept his eyes locked on Itachi, not willing to let him have a crack at harming the populace. He'd have to let everyone else worry about Sasuke and the rest of the Akatsuki, granted there were nowhere near as many now. That did not mean that their strength was lessened. While Itachi was keeping him busy, Kisame, Zetsu, and Tobi were moving to free Sasuke, and he couldn't allow that. He had warned them of the dangers of leaving him alive. He should have killed him when he had the chance. He would never leave a job that needed to be done in the hands of others ever again when he could just as readily do it. Itachi eyeballed the staff in Naruto's hand and let his own slip to his sword's hilt. He was nothing if not cautious, or was it paranoid? When did you get the staff, Naruto-kun? That's a unique way to summon it. I don't kiss and tell, Itachi. Now get the hell out of my way. Naruto made to run around the Uchiha and found his way blocked. I can't let you do that. Believe me, Naruto-kun, I don't want to rescue Sasuke. He's already messed up my plans enough. But it's not my choice. Naruto twirled his staff in his hand and spread his legs slightly, ready to run forward. What plans? I've said enough. Now show me what I want to know. Naruto ran forward, swinging his staff for Itachi's temple, and the Uchiha jumped to the side. Naruto used the momentum to carry himself around in a spin and lashed out for Itachi's legs. Itachi jumped over the staff and flipped backwards. As soon as his feet had touched the ground, Itachi rushed forward and pulled his sword from its scabbard. Naruto brought his staff up and blocked the blow that was aimed for his shoulder. The two weapons shook with their wielder's effort, and Itachi quirked his eyebrow. A staff made from chakra-conductive wood? That is definitely different, Naruto-kun. Perhaps you can tell me which one of you sent the forest after us in Suna? Naruto pushed Itachi back and thrust the pointy end of the gnarled staff toward Itachi's chest. The Uchiha bent backward and backflipped away. Naruto formed the Rasengan in his right hand and ran forward, attempting to catch Itachi with it. The missing meme dodged to the side and watched as Naruto flew past him and the Rasengan impacted the soil, sending chunks of dirt and debris flying. Naruto spun immediately and thrust his staff upward, blocking another attempt to behead him. Something felt wrong. Why wasn't he hearing any screaming? Why hadn't he seen Temari since this all started? Where the hell was the platform? Naruto blocked another thrust and snarled, lashing out and continuously spinning his body until he caught Itachi in the side, sending him flying. He cursed himself for a fool. Genjutsu, his one glaring weakness. Itachi had caught him the moment he locked eyes with him. How could he be so stupid? He thought he had come so far, and it took Itachi to make him feel like an academy student again. Unfortunately for Itachi, he wasn't 12 anymore. He wasn't 15 anymore. He could break Genjutsu on his own. It was just going to hurt like hell. Itachi watched as Naruto formed a Kage Bunshin and handed it the staff. His eyes grew wide when the clone brandished the staff and clubbed Naruto in the jaw as hard as it could, and the Genjutsu melted away, revealing everyone standing in the same spot. Naruto dismissed the clone and grabbed his staff again, before setting his jaw back in place. I hate Genjutsu. I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to kill your brother. No more hiding, Itachi. Temari, who hadn't noticed Naruto being put in such a subtle, suggestive Genjutsu, turned her head when she heard the name Itachi. Naruto? Itachi? Oh shit. The crowd all turned when they heard her shout, and a boom rang out over Konoha. She turned back to the stage to see Kisame and Tobi fighting several Konoha jounin. Pain and Konan were nowhere to be found. Sasuke was still down on his knees, Anko and Ibiki having joined the fray. He was trying to struggle to his feet. She couldn't let the bastard get away. Naruto, take care of yourself. I'm going to secure the prisoner. Naruto didn't look back at her, but nodded his head in affirmation. Temari ran for the stage, already pulling her fan from her sash. Naruto kept his eyes locked on Itachi, the real Itachi, who still had his cloak on. What do you need Sasuke for, Itachi? Why does Akatsuki need him? The Uchiha shrugged and remained impassive. I have no idea. I was only told to retrieve him. I'm not privy to every plot or desire of my master. And you still haven't answered my question. And you haven't answered mine. I guess we're at an impasse. I guess we are. The two glared at each other for a moment before running forward, wood and steel meeting each other. Temari made it to the stage just in time to watch as Kisame was pushed back by a group of ANBU and Tobi was being detained by Kakashi and some other jounins. Temari leapt up beside Sasuke and pushed him back to the ground, setting her knee into the small of his back. You just sit tight, Uchiha. You aren't going anywhere except hell today. The gag in Sasuke's mouth had somehow loosened itself in the tussle. Lucky for Temari. Now she got to listen to his mouth. You see, bitch? Someone came for me. I knew they would. Temari, not in the mood for it, pressed harder into his back and growled. Yeah, your brother and his buddies came for you. Don't act so damn smug. Sasuke tensed underneath her and immediately began to struggle. He's here? He's here. Let me go. Take the seals off and let me fight him. I have to avenge my clan. He's so close. Temari was about to knock the boy in the head with her fan when she saw something coming her way out of the corner of her eye and thrust her fan forward, blocking the kick that had been aimed for her head. She was knocked off of Sasuke's back and onto her butt. Hello, pretty lady. Tobi's a good boy. Temari blinked and used her fan to come to her feet as Kakashi and Sakura landed on either side of her. Kakashi eyeballed the Sharingan wielder and raised his headband, revealing his own copy eye. Tobi. It's not a pleasure to see you again. Ah, that wasn't nice. Tobi was having fun visiting you people. Tobi's been a good boy lately, so if you just hand Sasuke over, Tobi can go back to being a good boy again. Sakura stood in front of Sasuke, ready to punch. Not a chance, freak. You guys are mean. Kakashi opened his Sharingan eye and slid into a taijutsu stance. Who are you and why do you have the Sharingan? Why do you need Sasuke? Tobi's mood seemed to darken for a moment before the lightheartedness came back. Tobi can't tell you that. But, Tobi can tell you that you need to move. Kakashi narrowed his eyes, ready for anything. Why should we do that? So Tobi can get Sasuke? Sakura growled and jumped at the orange-masked ninja, barely missing him. Not a chance. Kakashi turned to Temari before leaping after Sakura. If you see an opening with this guy, take it. I have a hunch that he's the most dangerous one out of this group. Temari nodded and opened her fan all the way, revealing all 3 moons. She needed to wait for the right moment to release her resistance seals. Naruto ducked under another sword stab and kicked out towards Itachi, narrowly missing the Uchiha's groin. Itachi leapt backwards and glared at the blonde. That was a dirty move, Naruto-kun. Says the asshole who killed his whole family. I had my reasons. I'd love to hear them if you surrender. Itachi stopped for a moment, as if debating with himself on the merits of surrender, before lunging for Naruto and locking weapons with him once again. Itachi's face was a mask of neutrality as he leaned forward to whisper in Naruto's ear while the two battled for dominance. My reasons will become clear enough in due time. My time is up. I've detained you long enough. We shall see each other again soon. Naruto froze as Itachi stepped back and sheathed his sword. He looked from the hilt to Itachi's face, stupefied. What the hell are you doing? Itachi pulled his cloak closed and buttoned it up again. I have not found any satisfactory answers to my queries, and we have not gotten anywhere with this fight. I have detained you long enough. We shall meet again. Itachi shined away and Naruto spun immediately to the stage, his eyes widening in horror as he watched Temari get stabbed in the stomach by a kunai by Tobi. Kakashi and Sakura were doing a good job keeping Tobi at bay. The annoying Akatsuki member kept phasing in and out of Sakura's punches, and Kakashi was afraid to use his manjikyu for fear of accidentally maiming a comrade. Temari stood over Sasuke, periodically kicking him so that he'd stay down. She simply couldn't find an opening, and she knew if she removed the seals, she would attract attention. Kakashi called Sakura back and they squared off against Toby again. "Sensei, I can't hit him. He keeps disappearing. It's like when Naruto and Kiba tried to hit him that one time. What's his weakness?" Kakashi narrowed his eyes and kept them trained on the swirl-masked ninja. "I don't know. But he has chakra, he can't keep it up forever." "Of course I can. Toby has lots of chakra. Let's avoid the fight and you hand over Sasuke." Kakashi edged back to Sasuke slightly and pulled out a kunai. "I think not." "Why do you want him?" "Toby can't say. That would make Toby a bad boy." Kakashi tried to run a plan through his mind, but nothing was coming. There wasn't enough information, there wasn't enough time. They couldn't let Toby get his hands on Sasuke. If he got away, the cycle would continue and they'd never have any peace. But no matter what they tried, Toby always just dodged, or phased out of existence, or deflected the blows. He was untouchable. After nearly 5 minutes of back and forth, Toby got bored apparently and decided enough was enough. After dodging another blow from Sakura and a kunai stab from Kakashi, he turned to see what the others were doing. Kisame was laughing, a maniacal grin on his face, as he fought the ANBU. Itachi and Naruto were crossing weapons, and the blonde wasn't going anywhere. Tsunade and Jiraiya were busy with Zetsu, who was infuriating Tsunade by popping up here, there, and everywhere. They'd been at this long enough. Toby waited for Sakura to come for him again, and instead of phasing out or moving aside, he kicked her in the gut as hard as he could, sending her rocketing through one of the market stands and skidding into a building. Kakashi, while he feared she was hurt, tried to press the advantage, while Toby was off balance. The two began to exchange blows, neither landing decisive hits. Toby dodged a stab to his throat and jabbed at Kakashi's arm. "You're very good with that eye, Kakashi-san, for it being implanted." Kakashi knocked the blow aside and ducked as Sakura flew over his head, throwing a punch at Toby's head, which he let pass through him. "You seem very well schooled in the use of Sharingan as well. I did not think that there were other users, besides the Uchiha brothers and myself. Perhaps you can tell me how you got yours?" Toby flinched, and that was enough for Sakura to finally land a decisive blow. He flew into the side of a building and crashed through it, exploding out the other side. Sakura clenched her fist and the leather groaned as she grinned. Finally got him. She couldn't savor her moment, however, as Toby appeared before her, the massive, hateful aura coming from him stifling everyone. Sweat poured off her in rivulets. She hadn't been this scared, this petrified, since that time she met Orochimaru in the Forest of Death. The single Sharingan that Toby had exposed was spinning madly. "I'm tired of playing. Get out of my way." Before Sakura could reply, he backhanded her hard enough to snap her head around backward, sending her flying through several buildings before she skidded to a stop, barely missing Ichiraku's. Kakashi yelled out to her, but had to defend himself as Toby was upon him. He couldn't remember being this helpless in forever. Toby finally was able to block a kick Kakashi threw and landed a roundhouse kick to Kakashi's head, knocking the copy ninja back. He appeared before Temari instantly, wanting to take advantage of the moment. Toby would appreciate it if he would move. Temari grimaced and let her hands settle over the seals, releasing them. The rush of wind blew the dust in the air away and ruffled Toby's cloak, making it flap violently. The orange mask cocked to the side. What was that? Temari, now feeling much faster and more flexible, just put her fan behind her back, ready to swing it forward. None of your damn business. Now get lost. Sorry, can't do that. Toby ran forward and lashed out with a kick that Temari blocked with her fan. He was surprised at the speed with which she blocked, especially since the weapon was very heavy. The blow made him stumble slightly and she pressed the advantage, snapping the fan shut and swinging it with all her might at his head, watching with displeasure as it passed right through him. Sasuke began trying to get to his feet again and she jumped backward, stomping on his back and taking the air out of him, before leaping into the air and thrusting her fan downward towards Toby's head. It was no use, she just couldn't land a hit on him. Toby, it seemed, suddenly had a revelation. He twisted his head to look back at Naruto, who was locked up with Itachi again, and the smirk could be felt in his voice. I thought you looked familiar. We may not be after the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki today, but I can still leave him a present. Killing you will be a nice note for him. He leaned over and picked up Kakashi's discarded kunai and ran forward, thrusting at Temari's vitals. She blocked frantically, trying with all her might to avoid being stabbed. She couldn't watch over Sasuke and Toby at the same time, however, and backpedaled right over Sasuke, who was struggling to get up again, and lost her footing. Toby took advantage of her loss of balance and jammed the kunai into her gut. Temari gasped in horror and looked down to find it buried to the hilt. She fell to her knees, holding onto the metal and trying not to panic. She had to keep a level head in all of this. She felt herself fall backwards to the floor and took deep breaths. She hated the feeling of helplessness and feared death. If she died, what would become of Gaara? Of Kankuro? Of Naruto? She had only just begun to enjoy her life with him. Fear began to creep into her, but she fought it valiantly. She rolled her head to the side and watched as Toby picked up a bound Sasuke, threw him over his shoulder, and turned to her, mirth in his voice. Toby had fun playing with you, pretty lady, but now he has to go. Thanks for babysitting Sasuke-kun for us. Temari couldn't reply at the moment and Toby knew that. Maintaining her cool was more important at the moment if she wanted to live. He had not gotten a very good stab at her, but without treatment, she would die in time. He adjusted Sasuke to a more comfortable position and was about to make the signal for them to leave when power seemed to explode into the air and plant life suddenly erupted from the ground around him, thorns and brambles of all kinds, with beautiful blooms. Time stopped, it seemed, as he turned to the source and found a blond man, illuminated by a green aura, a staff in his hands stretched out toward him. For the first time in a long time, not Toby, Madara felt anxiety and a touch of fear. The young man looked incredibly pissed. Naruto had seen Temari get stabbed and his whole world seemed to stop. He watched her fall and struggled to stop Toby. He felt proud and afraid for her in the same moment. But her life was in danger and he couldn't allow that. His own anger, not the fox's, seemed to billow from within him, and he felt the essence of his power, the green, bubble up. A green aura began to surround him and he knew what he had to do. He was going to kill Sasuke and then the rest of them. He thrust his staff forward and called forth the most horrible briars, brambles, and thorns he could think of to deter the masked ninja. The offending plant life burst from the ground and surrounded the man. Toby looked back to Naruto and reached out, touching one of the thorns, pricking his finger and holding it to his face as the blood turned black. Poison. Very clever. I did not know that there was another who possessed the Mokuton bloodline. I'll take great pleasure in killing you, child. You're a descendant of my most hated enemy and revered friend after all. Naruto snarled and ran forward, the thorns moving aside for him as he began to swing on Madara. He could care less about the mysterious man's motives at the moment. He wanted revenge for what he had done to Temari. He needed to end this quick. Madara saw that this situation was not advantageous and decided that retreat was a better option. He humped over Naruto and let loose with a Keton Jutsu, burning a hole in the plants and leaping through before it could close again. Naruto howled in frustration and hurried after him. You're not getting away. Toby felt the winds whip around him and turned his head to find Naruto gaining on him. He figured the boy must have done something similar to Temari and then remembered what Itachi had told him of his fight with Sasuke. The boy was incredibly fast. Retreat was the best solution. As if on cue, all the Akatsuki were by his side, and he tossed Sasuke to Kisame. The fishman caught him deftly and they continued to run. Naruto turned his head to see if anyone was following him and was happy to find that no one was, and Tsunade was knelt down beside Temari. Good. No one else needed to see this. The Akatsuki members increased their speed and were outside the gates within seconds, running through the trees in the direction of Amigakure. They felt a hurricane force wind behind them, and as they entered a clearing, they found Naruto standing with his staff, his eyes showing a cold fury. I know I can't kill you but if I can't kill you, then I'll kill Sasuke, at least. He's not going free today. Kisame laughed and shrugged his shoulder, making Sasuke bounce. There's 4 of us, kid, and only 1 of you. What makes you think you have a chance? Because I'm not alone. Naruto formed the hand signs for Kuchiyos no Jutsu, and Tsubasa appeared under him, shooting the blonde ninja into the air. The Akatsuki looked on in awe at a summon that had never been seen, and Tsubasa glared down at them, baring his teeth. Ah, a full meal. Greens, sushi, and meat with orange sherbet on the side. What shall we do here, Naruto? Naruto looked down at the 4, still in a silent fury. Kill them all if you can. Especially the bound and gagged one. And what are you going to do? The same thing you are. I'm going to try to kill them. Naruto leapt off Tsubasa's head, straight for Kisame, and swung his staff at the man. Kisame leapt aside, still holding Sasuke on his shoulder. Naruto landed hard and took off after the fleeing Kisame. The other 3 started to chase him, but Tsubasa suddenly appeared in front of them, his teeth set in a grim sneer. Not so fast. My young ward has business with the fishy one. And it's about damn time you showed up, Sanzoku. The 3 turned to find a small red panda panting slightly behind them, and Zetsu chuckled. It's just Naruto's pet rat. He can't do anything. Sanzoku snarled and his fur stood on end. Let's see what I can do when I rip your face off, plant boy. The 3 Akatsuki watched as the red panda began to grow in size, until he was nearly half as big as Tsubasa. He stomped on the ground, creating a small tremor, and growled. By your leave, Tsubasa-sama, I want the manplant. Take him, child. I'll take the others. The 2 raccoon summons leapt into battle, nearly squishing their opponents. Kisame looked behind him fearfully. Naruto was gaining quickly, and it seemed that the plant life was closing in on him. The light ahead meant a clearing was coming up, and Kisame pumped more chakra into his legs when he felt a stinging sensation and looked down at the arm holding his sword. There was a vine with huge black thorns wrapped around his lower arm. The blood seeping from the scratch was black. Poison. He pulled his arm free of the vine and increased his speed with more urgency. If this brat got a hold of him, he burst into the clearing and stopped dead in his tracks. Before him stood Naruto, his blue eyes burning with a cold fury, his staff held in his right hand. The blonde glared at him and pointed his staff. Put him down, Kisame, and step away. He has to die. Kisame grinned and hefted his sword. Sorry, brat. You know, I can't do that. The boss would kill me if I let Sasuke die. Naruto didn't say anything. He simply looked at the ground and sighed. His head snapped up and he was upon Kisame, swinging his staff with all his might. Kisame blocked the blow with his sword and parried every blow. Naruto suddenly leapt back and jammed his staff into the earth in front of him. Kisame, ready for a jutsu, put his sword in front of him. What are you doing, brat? Trying to call up the fox? That won't work, you know. Naruto glared at Kisame and put his hands together as if in prayer. I know that. That's why I've decided to let my own power take care of you. Know in your death that nature claimed you, Hoshigaki Kisame. Kisame's beady eyes widened as the forest seemed to come alive, and he dropped Sasuke on the ground, swiping every which way with his sword, cutting branches, vines, thorns, brambles, grass, anything that got near him. He suddenly saw why Itachi was so interested in Naruto again. It was this power, a power that drew on nature. It was all around them, all the time, so he had no need to create unless he wanted to. He commanded plant life. As Kisame was drawn further and further away from Sasuke's bound form, he began to panic. He couldn't fail his mission. What would they do to him? Sasuke had to come back with them. He frantically began to cut his way back to the boy as Naruto made his way toward the Uchiha. Kisame let out a roar and hacked his way through, just before the briars parted and let Naruto through. He snatched the boy off the ground and shouldered him again, before starting to slash through the plants again. He finally made a hole in the wall and burst through, running for Amigakure, fear lending wings, to his feet. Naruto watched as Kisame ran, not believing he had slashed through his wall of plants and grit his teeth. He couldn't let him get away. He roared in frustration and ran after Kisame, and threw his staff like a missile. It flew through the air and struck Kisame in the back, embedding itself. The missing nin let out a gargled cry and fell to his knees, dropping Sasuke in the process. The Uchiha rolled and bounced several feet away and stopped with a grunt. The vines began to creep over Kisame again, and he yanked the staff from his back and began to panic, hacking and slashing at them again, Sasuke forgotten in a moment of self-preservation. Naruto directed the most poisonous vines to pick Sasuke up. His gag had come loose at some point, and he screamed when some of the thorns entered into him, their poison spreading quickly as he was lifted into the air. Sasuke felt the sting of the poison as it entered his system and came to the conclusion that he was going to die. No vengeance, no reviving his clan, no more living all because of his former best friend. His anger grew more and more as the poison coursed through his veins, and he finally noticed the branch that had been hovering over him, the end of it sharp as a senbon needle. He screamed out to the world as it descended upon him. "Damn you, Uzumaki Naruto! Damn you to hell!" A wet squelching sound cut through the clearing and all eyes turned to find Sasuke impaled on the branch, it having gone through his heart. His eyes had gone wide in shock and blood dripped from his mouth as he stared into the forest. Naruto just turned away, not wanting to look at what he'd done, but soon wished he hadn't as Tobi's fist found its way to his face, knocking him into a tree. The masked ninja, having somehow gotten away from the summons, began to pummel him into the bark. "You little bastard! All that planning, all that time, wasted because of your insignificant self-righteousness." Naruto couldn't move as Tobi overwhelmed him, landing blow after blow. Whenever Naruto struck back, the man phased that body part out of existence as if subconsciously, and continued to pound away. The vines worked to save him, but couldn't get a grip on the Akatsuki member. Tobi heard a blood-curdling scream behind him, but spared it no notice. It was inconsequential at the moment. Naruto was starting to lose consciousness when he heard a scream from several familiar voices. "Naruto! Tobi! Boss! Naruto! Get away from him!" Madara turned his head to find Tsunade, Jiraiya, and the two huge summons running his way and slammed Naruto's head against the tree, leaning down to his face, and whispered. "You're lucky I can't take you now. I need you alive, child, so stay that way for a little while longer. Heal yourself and we'll meet again. You won't stop my ambitions. Now, take a nap." Naruto's eyes rolled back in his head as Madara slammed his head into the trunk again and leaped away to follow the others. Kisame had slipped away at some point, probably helped by Zetsu or Itachi. Tsunade skidded to a stop beside Naruto and slapped him on his cheek. "Come on, brat, stay with us. We healed Temari, she's fine, so you can't let her see you like this." Naruto struggled to remain awake and tried to focus his vision. He had been careless when he allowed Tobi to get that close. He coughed up blood and pointed to a tangle of thorns in the middle of the clearing. "Sasuke's over there. I was able to get him at least. Bachan, we gotta talk when I wake back up." She had begun to run her hands over him, healing his internal injuries, noticing with great satisfaction that the Kyuubi was already working with her. Jiraiya gingerly pushed the thorns aside, careful to not touch them, and fished out Sasuke's body. The blood oozing from it was thick and blackened from all the poison. "I've got the Uchiha, Tsunade. He's deader than a doorknob." She nodded and kept healing Naruto. The boy had fallen asleep under her ministrations, and she smiled down at him. That must have been hard for him, having to do that. "No matter what he says, I know it must have hurt." Her eyes widened and she snapped her head around to Jiraiya. "What about Orochimaru?" Jiraiya shrugged and looked down at the body he was dragging behind him. "I dunno. He must have died with Sasuke. We'll never know." Tsunade picked up Naruto in her arms and Jiraiya handed Sasuke over to one of the ninjas that had accompanied them. The mood was somber as they marched back to Konoha. Jiraiya walked up beside her and looked down at Naruto. Tsubasa called out to them. "Are you going to take him to the hospital?" She shook her head and smiled down at the blonde in her arms. No. I'm going to take him to Minato's house and put him to bed. The way the fox heals him, he'll be up in a matter of days. Very well. When he wakes up, tell him I would like to speak to him as soon as possible. Sanzoku, watch over him. Yes, Tsubasa-sama. The giant summon disappeared in a large poof of smoke and Sanzoku crawled onto Jiraiya's shoulders, back to his small size again. Jiraiya didn't even notice and glanced at Tsunade again. What about Temari? It'll take her a little longer to heal up, even if you did heal most of the damage. Tsunade grinned and kept walking. We'll put them in the bed together. It's big enough that they won't disturb one another unless they want to. Jiraiya grinned. Now who's the pervert? Shut up, you old goat. Naruto awoke to a familiar sensation of arms wrapped around him. His eyes opened slowly and he glanced around the room he was in. Familiar curtains, check. Familiar paint, check. Familiar furniture, check. Familiar head of blonde hair laying across his chest, complete with the familiar smell of gardenias? Check. He smiled down at Temari and listened to her breathe. After watching her get stabbed, it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He adjusted his arm underneath her and found it was asleep. She yawned suddenly and her big teal eyes opened and locked onto his. Hey you. Welcome back. He smiled down at her and blinked sleepily. Same to you. How are you? She nuzzled into his chest more, her grip on him tightening. I'm fine. I'm just fine. She gasped when his arms locked around her and he pulled her to him, squeezing her tightly. Don't you ever do something like that again, do you hear me? Don't you ever scare me like that again. The misery in his voice broke any disagreement she was about to make and she simply kissed him on the lips and hugged him harder. You either. You two are so cute like that. Temari growled at Sanzoku, who lay at the end of the bed, his tail twitching back and forth happily. And you know how to ruin a mood. It's what I do best. I'm happy to see the two of you up and well. I'll leave you alone now. Rest and recover. There is much to do when you are back to full health. Thanks, plushie. Just rest. We'll exchange barbs later. Naruto and Temari nodded and he wrapped his arms back around her, pulling her close. They lay like that until they went back to sleep, unaware they were being watched. Sanzoku walked out the door and looked up, nodding to Tsunade as he walked between her legs and down the hall. Tsunade shushed Shizune and Sakura and ushered them away. Let them have their time. We'll talk to them later. Itachi watched as Madara destroyed part of the Akatsuki base in a fury, blowing things up, cutting walls, and generally wreaking havoc. Finally, the man stopped, as if remembering something and whirled around to face Itachi. What was that scream I heard while I was beating the Jinchuriki? Itachi looked at his sword and then back to Madara. That was Orochimaru breaking free. I found him trying to exit Sasuke's body while I retrieved Kisame. I trapped him in the genjutsu of my sword, in a world where he'll dream forever. He is no longer of consequence. Madara nodded and sat down on a nearby rock. Good. That's one nuisance taken care of. But this is a setback. We needed Sasuke for our plans and now we'll be set back. A third Sharingan would have been useful. I still don't see what use he would have been. Madara scoffed and put his chin in his hand. You wouldn't. Now leave me. I wish to be alone. Itachi bowed and exited the room, leaving Madara to his dark thoughts. You're so lucky, Uzumaki. So damn lucky that I need you alive for the moment. Naruto and Temari walked into the Hokage Tower after 2 more days of rest, feeling much better than they had. Naruto had some things to discuss with Tsunade that bothered him and find out what the populace thought of Sasuke's death. They walked past several ninja, all who smiled and bowed at them. They returned the gestures and continued on down the hall, to the stairs. Neither one knew why they were commanding such kind looks beyond the normal reasons. Tsunade's secretary ushered them in immediately and shut the door behind them. Naruto turned when he heard the click and heard Temari squeal. He spun to find her hugging Gaara, the Kazekage, not looking very amused. Tsunade watched the scene with amusement as Naruto walked forward and bowed to the two. Kazekage-sama, Hokage-sama. Gaara sighed and pried his sister off of him while glaring at Naruto. What have I told you about that title? Naruto grinned and shrugged, and Gaara closed his eyes as he sat down in a chair. It doesn't matter. Now, I've heard several things from Tsunade about your stay here. Why don't you enlighten me further? Naruto cleared his throat and took Temari's hand in his. Well, it started like this. Chapter 22. Temari and Tsunade screamed as Gaara's sand rose behind him and slammed into Naruto hard, thrusting him against the wall and holding him there. For Naruto, whose face hadn't changed from its impassiveness, it was business as usual, although there was a thin sheen of sweat on his face. He could practically taste the anger rolling off the Kazekage, and, truth be told, it was somewhat frightening. Gaara slowly and methodically walked forward until he and Naruto were face to face, their eyes never leaving the other. Temari and Tsunade had calmed down and were watching what was happening with wide eyes. What the hell were you thinking, Naruto? The blonde blinked and narrowed his eyes. I was catching and killing a dangerous criminal, Gaara. I couldn't let him get away. The sand tightened around him further and Naruto winced. What you did was assault 4 Akatsuki members with no backup and no plan in mind. That was foolish. Well, it all worked out in the end. The sand lifted him from the wall slightly and slammed him back against it. Temari screamed for Gaara to stop, but he paid her no mind. What if it hadn't, Naruto? What if they would have captured you? What if Tsunade had not arrived in time? But she did, so we're arguing over nothing. Gaara's voice lowered itself to a whisper as he glared at his friend. If you had died, what would become of Temari? She loves you, Naruto. How would she handle the grief? How would I? Or Kankuro? What about Tsunade and Jiraiya? You mean something to all of us, Naruto, and you would have thrown that away just to make sure that Sasuke's sentence was carried out. Naruto's head lowered so that his gaze would meet the floor. He heard her. What? Temari strode forward and put her hand on Gaara's shoulder. He turned to meet her sad eyes. That's enough, Gaara. He did what he thought was right. Don't punish him for that. The Kazekage turned to Naruto and sighed as he lowered him to the floor. Raise your head, Naruto. I'm mad at you as a friend and brother, not as a leader. You aren't being reprimanded. Naruto raised his head and gave him a weak smile. Somehow, that knowledge only makes it hurt worse. I can handle authority being mad at me. Get used to it. I'm still mad at you, Naruto, so don't think you're off the hook. But, we have other things to discuss now. Naruto nodded and made his way back to his overturned chair, righting it, and sitting down with Temari by his side again. He gave her a smile and took her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. She squeezed them reassuringly. Gaara watched the two of them out of the corner of his eye, and a ghost of a grin came to his face. Yes, everything would be all right. He turned back to Tsunade and coughed into his hand. In any event, we need to discuss what our next move is. Tsunade? Upon hearing her name, Tsunade tore her eyes away from the two lovebirds and laced her fingers under her chin. Well, I'm not sure. If Kisame is indeed dead, or at least incapacitated, that would leave only a few Akatsuki members. Perhaps we should press into Amigakure and try to kill them? Gaara sat for a moment, before shaking his head. We don't know anything about Amigakure, unfortunately, and we don't have the forces for a full-scale invasion. I doubt we could muster up enough allies to do the deed either. No, we'll need to be smart about this. We have time to plan now though. They still don't have all the demons. Perhaps we should seek out the 8-tailed demon host. His, or her, help could be advantageous. Tsunade nodded and leaned back in her chair, spinning to face the village. But would the Jinchuriki accept our help or offer? Not likely. We don't even know where they are anyway. Temari sighed and crossed her right leg over her left. Then have Jiraiya get his spy network working. Jinchurikis are normally a village's least hidden secret, even though they should be a top priority. It shouldn't take too long to find him. Tsunade nodded her head and whipped the chair around to face Gaara. Alright, we'll do that. But who will we send to negotiate with him? Gaara snorted and pointed at the two blondes. Them. Naruto has an innate ability to talk to people and make them listen. Temari will keep him on task. They're perfect for the job. Besides, they're worthless to me right now since they're being lovey-dovey with one another. Two indignant heis were ignored by the Kages. Tsunade nodded her consent to the plan. When will they start? I think a small rest is in order. If you'll allow it, they can stay here for a few more days before heading out. Even if Naruto heals fast, Temari doesn't, and the human body needs time to recover even with the help of medical jutsu. I have to return to Suna tomorrow. Until then, I'll make sure that these two don't do anything tonight that could exacerbate their wounds. Naruto and Temari turned red, whether from anger or embarrassment, neither Kage could tell, but then again, they didn't care. Gaara rose from his seat, Temari and Naruto rising with him out of habit, and bowed to Tsunade. Well then, I'll just let these two show me a place to eat. I'm starving. Tsunade sighed and waved them out, before glaring at the pile of paperwork before her. She picked the first page off the top and read it out loud. Petition by the Market District of Konoha to install more lighting so that we can sell our wares after dark. She growled and crumpled the paper into a ball before winging it into the wastebasket. That's it. I'm going to start delegating more tomorrow. I need a drink now. She started to reach for her sake bottle and remembered what Tsubasa told her. Shit. I forgot to tell him to contact the raccoon. Well, I'm hungry anyway, and I want out of the office. I'll just eat lunch with those three. Giving a yell at Shizun that she'd be back later, Tsunade grabbed her green jacket off the hook and walked out the door. Temari sighed loudly as she walked between the two men, her arms wrapped around theirs. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was a confrontation boiling between the two and she wanted to avoid that at all costs. She had been unhappy with Naruto when he ran off after Akatsuki as well, but realized that he felt obligated to do it. Gaara was not one to take such things lightly. He knew how much Naruto meant to Temari and didn't want to see her hurt because of the boy's recklessness. Not to mention that he considered Naruto a friend and brother. It would have been a hard blow for him, his siblings, and Tsunagakure. The blonde was important to too many people. Thinking of the people of Suna led her to think of his students. They adored him. How would his death have affected them? A teacher was like a sage to students, dispensing helpful information, helping them where they were able, listening to problems. Teachers were invaluable to both children and the village alike and, as the premier teacher of Suna, Naruto would be irreplaceable. Every person they passed bowed or nodded politely in their direction, some to her, some to Gaara, but most to Naruto. It only raised her ire more, that they would encourage his reckless actions. That's when she realized that she herself had not berated him for his rashness. She had been so relieved that he was all right that her anger at his actions had not come to the forefront, but now, that emotion was bubbling to the surface. She looked at Gaara and they locked eyes, sharing similar looks of disdain. With but a simple nodding of heads, she switched positions with Naruto so that he was in the middle. He was so preoccupied with his thoughts that he didn't notice or sense the two flat palms headed for the back of his head. Smack! Smack! Naruto yelped and rolled forward, coming back up facing the siblings, who were both glaring at him. He growled at them and rubbed the back of his head. What the hell was that for? Temari, now incensed, walked forward and grabbed his collar, jerking him down to face her. He was about to yell again when he saw the tears prickling at the corner of her eyes. His mouth seemed to weld itself shut. Damn it, Naruto. How could you have been so reckless? What if they had caught you? Did you ever think of how we'd all be affected by that? It isn't just you that gets hurt if you get captured. The people that had been passing by on the street began to slow down and Gaara gave them all a hateful look and flared his sand behind him. I'd suggest you all move along. The people scattered immediately and soon the whole street was deserted, except for the three Suna ninja. Gaara turned his attention back to find a wide-eyed Naruto staring at Temari, who had apparently been babbling while his attention was elsewhere. And another thing, you jerk. You ran off without checking on me. How could you do that? But sweetie, you had Tsunade, I don't give a damn. Gaara felt a presence beside him and turned to find Tsunade looking at the scene with much amusement. He quirked an eyebrow and shrugged before turning back to the one-sided argument. I thought you had paperwork to do. Screw paperwork. This is much more entertaining. I was hungry, and I have to tell Naruto something that I forgot to tell him in the office. And you haven't even apologized yet. But Temari, I can't apologize if I can't get a word in. You got a few words in then, you asshole. Tsunade snorted and covered her mouth. Temari was really letting him have it. Amusing as it was, however, she couldn't have the two blondes fighting in her streets. Temari was taking a deep breath to launch back into Naruto when she heard a slow clapping behind her and turned her head to find a bemused Hokage, with a curious Gaara behind her. The blonde girl flushed red and dropped Naruto into the dust. He huffed and pushed himself back to his feet. Tsunade-sama, I'm sorry. Tsunade gave the stammering girl a warm smile and waved her hand dismissively. Oh hush. I enjoy watching Naruto get verbally castrated by someone other than Sakura or myself. It's nice to know that you don't let him get away with everything. Temari offered up an embarrassed smile while Naruto glared at Tsunade. The Hokage grinned cheekily and clapped her hands together. So, what say we find someplace to eat? Preferably with a fine selection of alcohol. For some reason, Jiraiya seemed to sniff them out, and by the time they reached the restaurant, the Toad Sage was right alongside them. Naruto had wanted a Chiraku's, but it was shot down in favor of a finer eating establishment. One with a fine assortment of wines, beers, and of course, sake. Once everyone was settled in and a couple rounds of drinks had been served, Jiraiya locked eyes with Naruto and became serious. So I hear that you're going to try to recruit the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki. Naruto's drink had been halfway to his mouth when Jiraiya spoke and he sat it down with a frown. I have never understood how you always know things ahead of time. Jiraiya grinned and tapped his ear. I keep this to the ground. It also doesn't hurt that toads are all over the place. They see a lot and all it takes is one of the summoned toads to translate or an innate ability to communicate with nature. Naruto nodded his head in understanding and Jiraiya quirked his eyebrow, waiting for an answer. Yeah, we are. It was Bachan and Gaara's idea. Temari and I will be going to talk to him, try to convince him to join us. Jiraiya shook his head and swirled his sake. He won't. He's fiercely private and hates to be bothered. Naruto thumped his head on the table in defeat. Usually when Jiraiya said no to something, it was because he'd already tried or he'd known someone who tried and didn't think it was possible. Temari rubbed Naruto's back consolingly and watched as he raised his head off the table and rested his chin on the wood, looking from one to the other. I still gotta go though. It would be a wasted opportunity to get someone powerful on our side, not to mention give Akatsuki a fucking headache. Temari nodded in agreement and sipped at her wine. The food that she ate only made her wish Naruto had cooked instead. The beef was undercooked and the vegetables had been steamed too long. How she wanted to be home with Naruto in the kitchen in an apron. Temari. What do you think? She shook herself from her thoughts of a half-naked Naruto, an apron, and a bowl of whipped cream, and glanced around, noticing with embarrassment that they were obviously waiting for her answer. What were we talking about? Gaara sighed and shook his head. You can't afford to be hormonal if you're going with Naruto, Temari. Get your mind out of the gutter. Her mouth opened slightly in disbelief and she growled out her reply. My mind was not in the gutter. Then explain why your nose is bleeding ever so slightly. Temari grabbed a spoon from the table and looked at her reflection in it, before dropping the silverware and dabbing at her nose with a napkin. She glared at a snickering Jiraiya. Not a fucking word, pervert. The older man merely grinned and sipped his sake innocently. I'm not the one bleeding from the nose, dear. Naruto put his hand over Temari's to calm her, lest she assault his mentor. Since we've been assigned to do this, do you have any info on where he is? Jiraiya scoffed and leaned back in his chair. Have you forgotten who you're talking to, brat? I'm the great Toad Sage, super perv, yada yada yada. Where is he? Jiraiya grunted and slurped his sake again. Well, if you're going to be rude, I'm not telling you anything. Get your own information, you little bastard. Naruto sighed and put his head in his hands. Erosenin, nope, not this time. Respect is something to be given, Naruto, as is information. Tsunade reached under the table and Jiraiya grinned pervertedly for a moment before releasing a high-pitched squeal and whimpering. Everyone looked at him curiously as he squeaked out his answer. Okay, he's in a shack up on a mountain in Kumo. Now, let me go. Tsunade brought her hand back onto the tabletop and poured Jiraiya another cup of sake before giving it to him while smiling sweetly. See? Was that so hard? Jiraiya just glared at her and sucked down his sake, holding out his dish for another pour. Naruto, seeing he wasn't going to get anything else, rose from his seat, Temari rising with him. Well, I guess we'll go to Hinata's house and start packing to go. Gaara grabbed his wrist before he could leave. Do not be hasty. My sister still needs rest and so do you. You will leave in 1 week and not a day sooner. The Jinchuriki will still be there. Temari was not convinced. But Gaara, time is on our side. Akatsuki has taken a blow and will take time to recover. Madara will have to regroup and replan. He was not planning to take you here. You are the last on their list. They'll try for the 8 tails next, but they'll need strength, and Hoshigaki is a valuable member. If he is not dead, they will spend time to heal him. She nodded her head in consent, but she was not happy. She didn't want to be in Konoha anymore, and she was sure Naruto didn't either. Before the 2 blondes could exit though, Tsunade called them back. Naruto, I nearly forgot to tell you something important. You need to contact Tsubasa again. He wants to talk to you about something. He nodded and wrapped his arm around Temari's waist as they walked out. Tsunade watched them leave with a sigh while swirling her wine glass. Ah, young love. Jiraiya grinned and downed his sake. But what about old love? You're just lucky I love you enough to actually even consider touching you. A cough from beside them brought their attention to a disturbed Gaara, who rose from his seat quickly. I believe I shall retire as well. I've heard enough. Jiraiya watched the Kazekage leave with a twinkle in his eye. Dumb kid. If he'd have stuck around, he might have learned something. He turned back to a flustered Tsunade and his grin lessened. What? You're sleeping on the couch tonight. Naruto and Temari went to a secluded training ground, one that didn't look like it had been used in a few months, and Naruto bade her to stand back, citing that he didn't know what kind of mood Tsubasa would be in. She stepped back, he flipped through the hand signs, and with a cry, a large poof of smoke heralded Tsubasa's arrival. Hello, young ones. It is good to see you again, and especially you, Temari. I hope you are in good health. Temari nodded and bowed to the raccoon. Hi, Tsubasa-sama. No need for that, young one. Naruto, where is Senzoku? Naruto shrugged nonchalantly. I dunno. Haven't seen him since this morning. Allow me to rectify this. Tsubasa closed his eyes and flipped through a few seals of his own, and with a smaller poof, Senzoku arrived, curled up asleep on the ground. Senzoku, wake up. The small red panda looked up sleepily and squeaked when it saw who was before it. Tsubasa-sama. Forgive me. I didn't realize you were here. Where are we? Tsubasa sighed, his breath rattling the treetops as he gazed upon his smaller subject. We are in a clearing in Konohagakure. I must say, you have become quite lazy in your time with Naruto. Do you need to be replaced? No, Tsubasa-sama. Of course not. Ah, leave him alone, Tsubasa. His laziness is somewhat endearing. The giant raccoon turned his gaze on Naruto and his eyes hardened. Indeed. Now then, you and I must speak. Naruto blinked and swallowed nervously. Okay. You summoned me the other day without warning to assist you in a battle. While I do not mind, our deal was that you would restore Suna to her original glory. Why have you not fulfilled that obligation yet? Look, I'm getting there. It's not so cut and dry as just doing it. I can do it to the desert, but it takes time. I need water sources, and digging for them is slow work. I'm trying. All right. I believe you. It has been long since I put so much faith in a human, Naruto. Don't make it so that my faith is misguided. Naruto puffed up indignantly. I would do no such thing. I'm a man of my word, Tsubasa. When I say I'll do something, you can count on me accomplishing it. Tsubasa looked from Naruto to Sanzoku. Naruto stood proudly with his chest out. Sanzoku was seated on his rump with his head bowed in respect. The raccoon regent turned his gaze upon Temari and gave her a toothy grin. And you, young lady? Do you believe my faith in your chosen is misguided? Temari shook her head vehemently, her ponytails flopping, and gave Tsubasa an emphatic no. The giant summon nodded his head and grinned at all three. That is all I needed, a reaffirmation of your loyalty to the raccoons, and the knowledge that you were still upholding our bargain. Call on me again, should you need my services, and I'm quite sure you will. It has been a long time since any prey escaped my clutches. Naruto sighed in relief and grinned up at Tsubasa. How did they escape from you? I'm not entirely sure. One second they were there, the next they weren't. It might have been Genjutsu. I'm just not sure. Well, I must be off. Remember to call on me if you need any more assistance. Temari and Naruto covered their faces when Tsubasa dispelled himself, forcing a giant wave of wind and smoke to cover them. Sanzoku anchored himself to the ground and covered his nose with his paws. Once the wind had died down, Naruto scooped the red panda onto his shoulder and wrapped his arm around Temari again. Let's go home. I'm taking a shower and going to bed. Care to join me? Temari grinned and nestled into his side more. Oh, absolutely. Gaara went home the following day, with instructions that once they had finished their mission of contacting the Eight Tails Jinchuriki, they were to report to Tsunade and then return home to Suna immediately. They really liked that order. They said goodbye to all their friends in Konoha and struck out on the road to Kumo. Jiraiya had been able to find the name of the mountain they should be looking for, 1MT on Reikyo. They would need to be careful on their trip to Kumo. Konoha was not well liked in that place, and Suna, as an ally, was about as welcome as a rat in a corn bin. They would need to be careful as well with the Jinchuriki. There was no telling if he was stable or not. Or if he would even accept their invitation. It was a long 6 days to Kumo, but it was refreshing for the two to be out on their own, with no one watching over them. Days were spent in idle chatter and plans for the future. Naruto was planning on starting on his house when they got back. He said it had been too long since he'd had his own place. Temari wasn't happy about that until a certain memory hit her. Naruto wanted her to move in with him. She excitedly asked him how long it would take, and he said less than a week. He'd been reading up on construction practices, and with his Kage Bunshin, it would be nothing at all. Plus, he'd save money doing everything himself. It was a sound plan. Temari just wanted Akatsuki to leave them the hell alone. Her whole life she had been unhappy, and when Gaara started acting normal, it had a snowball effect. She started to be genuinely happy for the first time in her life, and when Naruto came along she could say it felt good to be a woman around someone, not just a hard-ass bitch. She had been scared to death when Naruto ran off after Akatsuki. Thoughts of his capture and subsequent death had run rampant through her mind. When she woke up next to him and heard his soft breathing, she had simply collapsed against him in relief. Now though, she wanted to get this mission over with and get back to Suna. Once he had the house built, she would get to do something she'd never done before, shopping for furniture. Oh sure, she'd picked out things for the compound before, but never for herself. Naruto was thinking along the same lines as Temari. He wanted this mission over with. He had something to build when he got back home. His own house. Not an apartment, not a shack, not a bedroom with friends, but his own, real house. The only component he wanted in the house for sure was Temari. He'd sleep on wooden floors if it meant she was there. MT Onreikyo revealed itself through the fog in the distance, and Naruto shivered at its size. Most assuredly, the Jinchuriki would be all the way at the top or at least close to it. He hated Kumo already. It seemed to be nothing but limitless mountain ranges with thunderstorms thrown in. The two blondes stopped at the base of the mountain and looked up. They could barely see something protruding out of the side of the mountain, about 3/4 of the way up. That had to be it. They shared a nod and began bouncing up the rocks, forsaking the path. It was much easier to stick to the rocks with chakra than to spend all day walking a winding path. Within 20 minutes, they landed on the precipice outside the small shack. Naruto and Temari looked around for a moment and found nothing. Huh. Guess he's not here. A low rumble came from inside the shack and Temari looked inside the door, only to scramble backwards, falling on her butt and backing into Naruto's knees. He looked down at her curiously as she looked up at him. What was that all about? There's something in there and it isn't human. Naruto frowned and made his way over to the door, peeking inside. All he could see was darkness. I don't see. A fist met his nose, and he stumbled backward, clutching it as blood ran through his fingers. Temari jumped to her feet and pulled her fan from behind her back, her head snapping back and forth, trying to watch both Naruto and whoever had hit him. A dark hand found its way to the doorframe and a groan was heard as the individual stepped outside into the sunlight. Oh goddamn, I hate the sun. People visiting in the day isn't any fun. Temari blinked at the bad rhyme and watched as the large, black man stretched and bent in several directions. Her analytical mind observed the many swords on his back and she quickly classified him as a kenjutsu master, not just an expert. They were ill-equipped to fight such an opponent, especially in his element. A quick snapping sound let her know that Naruto had finally reset his nose, and he stepped up beside her. Naruto let out a sigh and observed their mission. He was an odd one, his face contorting this way and that and his body seemed to be in constant motion as if moving to some unheard rhythm. The man constantly shielded his eye from the sun as he looked at them. I was sleeping back there in my own little world. Now what brings you up here, you rude blonde boy and blonde girl? Naruto noticed that the man was trying to rap and was doing it badly and snickered. It was kind of a cool way to talk, he thought. Temari wrinkled her nose in disgust. Why the hell did she have to meet so many weirdos in her life? Was it so much to ask for one to talk normally? Seeing Naruto had a goofy grin on his face, she realized she'd have to be the spokesperson. We're ninja from Sunagakure. We've come to offer you our help in exchange for yours. Oh really, fly little honey? I don't do nothing for free, that costs time and money. Temari sighed when she heard Naruto snicker again and rubbed her temples. Could you please speak normally, sir? This is serious business. We're here to tell you about an organization that is trying to capture all the bijou and Jinchuriki. Hachikira is no fool. Avoid the Akatsuki is the golden rule. Naruto smiled at the man. Is Hachikira your name? The black man nodded and bobbed his head up and down. Hachikira is the name. Ask me again and I'll tell you the same. Temari covered her eyes with her right hand and leaned against her fan. Sir, please, stop. The man, now identified as Hachikira, stopped gyrating and looked at Temari. She thanked whatever gods were listening and coughed into her hand. We've come here to speak with you about a possible alliance to defeat the Akatsuki. You are a part of their plans and, well frankly, we need your help. You're a lot more experienced than most in dealing with a bijou, and since you have the second most powerful one we thought you could help Naruto, my companion. Kira was now standing stock still and looking at Naruto with intensity. She was about to speak again when he held his hand up. I know who he is, little lady. We've met once before, but neither of us knew what the other was. Naruto nodded his head. That Kumo bar, right? The one you got tossed out of for rapping badly while drunk? Kira's mouth turned up in a small sneer. They just don't appreciate good rhymes. Come inside, we'll talk there. The sun is murder on my eyes. Temari swung her fan to her back and set it into place. Will you stop rhyming and speak normally? Kira turned in the doorway and grinned at her. Does it bother you, little lady? Somewhat, yes. Then, yes, I'll rhyme. All the time. When I'm in a bind. When I'm in a line. Anything just to mess with your mind. Naruto and Kira both laughed as Temari grit her teeth and stomped her foot in annoyance. Naruto watched as Kira disappeared into the inky blackness and kissed Temari on the cheek. He's just doing it to annoy you, Temari. I think he likes you. You're probably the first woman he's seen in months. She huffed and followed him inside. There was nothing in the shack, it was just a cover that led into a cave. A light suddenly flared up and they saw Kira lighting a lamp and hanging it from a stalactite. He turned to them and folded his arms as he sat on a boulder. Well, you came here for a reason. Let's hear it. Kisame coughed and leaned over the bed to spit out the black glob of blood and poison that had been coursing through his system. He had never felt so weak in all his life and thanked his lucky stars that Itachi had gotten to him when he did. His physiology normally took care of poisons, but this one was foreign and tougher than most. He spit up another glob of blood and laid back on his pillow. I'll kill that bastard. He'll never know what happened. No, he'll know. I'll hold him down and skin him alive with Samahata. I don't believe I've ever seen you so weak, Kisame. I could kill you now and no one would even know. Kisame looked up over his chest and saw Pain and Conan standing in the doorway. He coughed again and simply laid his head back. Leader Sama. To what do I owe the pleasure? You observed firsthand something unheard of. Tobi, Itachi, and Zetsu told me what they saw, but you experienced it firsthand. Tell me about Uzumaki's new power. Kisame groaned and barely was able to lean over the bed before coughing up a large amount of blood. He couldn't wait to be fully healed. Well, he commanded. The plant's Pain's eyes hardened and he glared down at the shark man. Go on.